adrift with no crew. Letters sent by hands adrift with no crew. Letters sent by hands never identified. Footprints that end abruptly at the edge of a cliff. These are not legends. They are documented events, preserved in records, whispered in courtrooms, and debated by investigators. For the next 3 hours, we will step carefully into these shadows, tracing evidence, questioning assumptions, and confronting the unknown. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. The desert wind moves softly across the sands of Upper Egypt, brushing against the broken columns of forgotten temples. In the half-light of dawn, the walls of ancient sanctuaries still carry carved figures of ibis-headed scribes and watchful gods. Among them stands Thoth, the divine recorder, the keeper of knowledge, the silent witness to creation itself. It is here, in the shadow of monuments raised more than 3,000 years ago, that the legend of a vanished text begins. The so-called Book of Thoth is not a single surviving manuscript resting behind museum glass. No complete scroll has ever been recovered. Instead, its existence drifts through fragments, references in ancient tales, lines in later Greek writings, and scattered passages preserved in Egyptian demotic texts. To historians, it is less a physical object and more an echo. In Egyptian belief, Thoth was the god of writing, wisdom, measurement, and magic. He was said to have invented hieroglyphs and to record the judgments of souls in the afterlife. A text attributed to him would not have been ordinary. It would have carried authority beyond that of kings. The most detailed account of the mysterious book appears in a demotic Egyptian story often called the Setne Kamwas tale, composed around the Ptolemaic period, though set centuries earlier. In this narrative, Prince Setne, sometimes identified with a historical son of Ramesses II, seeks out a hidden scroll written by Thoth himself. The book, buried in a tomb and protected by serpents and traps, is said to grant extraordinary powers. The ability to understand the speech of animals, to see the gods, to command the heavens and the earth. Is this merely fiction? Many scholars regard the tale as moral literature, a warning against forbidden knowledge and reckless ambition. In the story, Setne's triumph turns to suffering. The book brings illusions, loss, and grief. Knowledge in this version is not a blessing, but a burden. Yet even fiction often rests upon older traditions. Ancient temple libraries did exist. Priests carefully guarded ritual texts, astronomical records, and sacred hymns. In cities like Hermopolis, closely associated with Thoth, scribes were trained in complex systems of writing and theology. Some researchers suggest that the Book of Thoth may refer not to a single scroll, but to a body of esoteric temple knowledge reserved for initiates. Fragments of a text scholars now call the Book of Thoth have indeed been discovered. Dialogues written in demotic script, dating to the 1st century BC or slightly earlier. These texts describe conversations between a master and a student, exploring divine wisdom and the responsibilities of scribes. They are philosophical, instructional, and symbolic. However, they do not describe magical powers or hidden tombs. Instead, they emphasize discipline, understanding, and spiritual insight. So where did the more dramatic legend originate? Greek writers, fascinated by Egyptian religion, often blended myth and interpretation. Over time, Thoth became identified with Hermes, giving rise to the figure of Hermes Trismegistus and the broader Hermetic tradition. In late antiquity and the Renaissance, European occult thinkers spoke of lost Egyptian books containing primordial wisdom, texts believed to predate Moses, to preserve secrets of creation itself. Could the Book of Thoth have been a symbolic stand-in for this ancient wisdom tradition? Or was there once a specific ritual manuscript, now destroyed, whose reputation grew with each retelling? Archaeology offers no sealed chamber labeled with its name. No papyrus bearing its complete title has emerged from the sands. And yet Egypt has surprised the world before. Entire caches of texts, like those found at Nag Hammadi, lay hidden for centuries before discovery. Perhaps the Book of Thoth was never meant to be found. Perhaps it represents the tension between knowledge and mystery, between what can be written and what must remain sacred. In a civilization that revered writing as divine invention, the idea of a final, ultimate text, one that revealed the structure of the cosmos, would have been irresistible. And so the question lingers in the dry desert air. Was the Book of Thoth a moral tale, a coded tradition of priestly learning, or a lost manuscript still waiting beneath the sand? And as the legend of a lost Egyptian book fades into the desert horizon, another question emerges. Far to the east, beyond the Nile, beyond Mesopotamia, where fire once burned continuously in stone temples, and words were guarded as sacred flame. High on a rocky terrace in what is now Iran, the wind moves across the ruins of Persepolis. Broken columns rise against the pale sky, their capitals carved into the shapes of bulls and lions. Here, in 330 BC, the armies of Alexander of Macedon entered the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire. What followed would echo through both history and legend. The burning of the royal complex, an act recorded by Greek historians and debated ever since. But according to later Zoroastrian tradition, it was not only palaces that were lost in those flames. It was knowledge. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, traces its teachings to the prophet Zarathustra, known to the Greeks as Zoroaster, who may have lived sometime between 1500 and 1000 BC, though scholars continue to debate the precise date. His hymns, known as the Gathas, form the spiritual core of the Avesta, the sacred scripture of the faith. These verses speak of cosmic struggle between truth and falsehood, light and darkness, and of a single supreme creator, Ahura Mazda. Today, the Avesta survives only in fragments, preserved through centuries of upheaval. The oldest existing manuscripts date to the medieval period. Yet Zoroastrian sources written many centuries after Alexander's conquest tell a far more dramatic story. According to Middle Persian texts like the Denkard, the original Avesta was vast, comprising 21 books, written in gold ink on prepared cowhides, stored in royal archives. It allegedly contained not only spiritual teachings, but also knowledge of astronomy, medicine, law, and cosmology. When Alexander invaded, these texts were said to have been destroyed, burned deliberately, or carried off to be translated into Greek, their sacred essence scattered. Mainstream historians approach these claims cautiously. Greek accounts of the conquest, such as those by Arrian and Diodorus Siculus, describe the burning of Persepolis, but make no mention of a grand Zoroastrian library reduced to ash. Some scholars suggest that the later Zoroastrian narrative may reflect a cultural memory of loss, shaped by centuries of foreign rule and religious competition. After all, the Achaemenid Empire did fall. Temples were disrupted. Priestly institutions would have faced immense upheaval. But was there truly a single, unified Great Avesta at the time of Alexander? Or were the sacred texts primarily transmitted orally, as was common in many ancient traditions? Linguistic analysis suggests that much of the Avesta was indeed preserved through memorization long before it was written down. If so, the destruction of physical manuscripts, while devastating, may not have erased the religion's core teachings. Still, the tradition of deliberate destruction persisted. Later, Zoroastrian writers portrayed Alexander as the accursed, blaming him for the fragmentation of their scriptures and the interruption of sacred knowledge. In this telling, what survived into later centuries was only a partial reconstruction, painstakingly gathered from memory during the Sasanian period, hundreds of years after the conquest. And here, the mystery deepens. What if there were texts, scientific, philosophical, theological, that never made it into the reconstructed canon. The Persian Empire was vast, stretching from the Indus Valley to the eastern Mediterranean, including lands that are today part of Iraq and beyond. It governed diverse peoples and traditions. Could the priestly archives have contained records now entirely unknown to us? Some fringe theories go further, suggesting that Greek philosophers may have absorbed fragments of Zoroastrian cosmology, ideas about dualism, angels, and the final renewal of the world, through translations seized after the conquest. There is evidence of cross-cultural exchange in the Hellenistic era. Concepts once thought uniquely Greek show intriguing parallels with Persian thought, but direct lines of transmission remain difficult to prove. Archaeology offers no dramatic cache of charred scrolls labeled Lost Avesta. What we have instead are later testimonies, filtered through centuries of reinterpretation. Fire, after all, is both literal and symbolic in Zoroastrianism. It represents purity, divine presence, and truth. To say that sacred knowledge was destroyed by fire carries a resonance deeper than simple historical record. Yet the absence itself invites reflection. When empires fall, archives disappear. When languages fade, entire worldviews can slip beyond recovery. How much of the ancient Persian intellectual world was tied to texts now vanished? How many hymns, commentaries, or cosmological diagrams were lost not in a single night of flames, but through gradual erosion, war, neglect, translation, misunderstanding? Standing among the ruins of Persepolis, it is difficult not to imagine shelves of carefully inscribed manuscripts, tended by priests who believed they were preserving the blueprint of creation. Whether those shelves truly burned in 330 BC, or whether the story grew in the telling, the sense of rupture is undeniable. And so we are left with fragments, verses that survived, traditions reconstructed, accusations written long after the smoke cleared. Somewhere between documented conquest and inherited memory lies the truth. Were the hidden Zoroastrian texts truly destroyed by Alexander's fire? Or have they simply slipped beyond the reach of history, waiting in some forgotten corner of the past to be rediscovered? And as the embers of lost Zoroastrian knowledge fade into history, our journey turns westward, across the Mediterranean, to a city of legend whose influence once stretched from the coasts of North Africa to the distant shores of the Atlantic. Carthage, a mercantile powerhouse, built not only on trade but on ambition, innovation, and maritime mastery, left traces of itself in ruins, in stories, and, some whisper, within records that vanished before their secrets could reach the modern world. The harbor at Carthage, reconstructed from archaeological evidence, would have been a marvel of engineering in the 4th century BC. Circular docks connected by canals, warehouses lined with inscriptions, and fleets of triremes and merchant vessels, each boat a vessel of both commerce and information, made the city a hub of knowledge and influence. Imagine the scribes who worked in its offices, documenting trade agreements, shipping manifests, and the movement of exotic goods across the known world. Could some of these records have gone beyond the practical, entering the realm of history, yet unknown to us today? The Carthaginian civilization, founded by Phoenician settlers from what is today Lebanon, thrived on the edge of the western Mediterranean. It became a maritime superpower, competing with Rome and other powers for centuries. Historians recognize Carthage's formidable ability to record information, not only through inscriptions and monumental architecture, but also in codified systems for commerce and navigation. But almost all of these records vanished with the city's fall in 146 BC. Rome, after a protracted siege during the Third Punic War, systematically destroyed Carthage, leaving it in ruins, a cautionary tale of annihilation. The surviving accounts of Carthage come mostly from Roman historians, Polybius, Livy, Appian. but they are inherently biased, framed from the perspective of a victorious enemy. Roman writers emphasized the city's wealth, its military might, and the alleged moral failings of its people. Yet, buried within these narratives are glimpses of what might have been. Extensive commercial ledgers, maps of trading routes across the Atlantic, records of diplomatic missions, and, some suggest, texts that may have hinted at early understandings of geography far beyond the Mediterranean. Some scholars have speculated that Carthaginian merchants and explorers may have reached parts of West Africa, possibly even the Canary Islands, centuries before Columbus. The idea is tantalizing, but tangible evidence is scarce. What could have been recorded in the Atlantic records of Carthage? Did they include observations of distant lands, accounts of encounters with unfamiliar peoples, or descriptions of oceanic phenomena? If such documents ever existed, their disappearance is nearly total, leaving us to reconstruct their scope from fragments and hints. Archaeological excavations reveal pieces of Carthaginian society, inscriptions on stelae, votive offerings, remnants of trading contracts, and fragments of codices, but nothing comprehensive enough to rival the Roman destruction's thoroughness. Still, whispers persist. Ancient geographers, such as Hanno the Navigator, wrote of voyages down the African coast, describing encounters with peoples, wildlife, and geography unknown to the classical Mediterranean world. Could Hanno's accounts have been part of a broader Carthaginian archive, a central repository of Atlantic knowledge, now irretrievably lost? The mystery deepens when we consider the fate of Carthaginian libraries. Rome's destruction was deliberate, aimed at erasing not only the city's power, but its culture. Reports claim that entire repositories of knowledge were burned, buried, or scattered. And yet, the Carthaginians had developed techniques for storing information. Wax tablets, papyrus codices, and perhaps other formats now lost to time. How many of these might have held data on astronomy, navigation, or trade networks stretching across the Atlantic? Could their disappearance have erased insights that might have reshaped our understanding of pre-Roman exploration? Some fringe theorists propose even bolder ideas. Could Carthage have maintained contact with distant Atlantic islands, or kept early charts of lands beyond Africa's western coast? Could these lost Atlantic records have included observations of ocean currents, monsoon winds, or celestial navigation techniques unknown elsewhere at the time? While speculative, such questions are rooted in plausible maritime expertise. Carthage's economy depended on mastery of the seas, and it is reasonable to imagine that detailed records of voyages and trade existed, meticulously kept until the city's destruction. Yet, the further we dig into the fragments of history, the murkier the picture becomes. Roman accounts emphasize wealth and conquest, but reveal little about the content of lost Carthaginian archives. Archaeological evidence hints at sophisticated administration, complex urban planning, and detailed knowledge of the Mediterranean, but nothing confirms the full extent of what might have been written, cataloged, or preserved in centralized records. And with each destroyed archive, the line between fact, reconstruction, and legend grows thinner. Standing on the remains of Bursa Hill, the city's ancient citadel, it is not hard to imagine the lost records. Rows of tablets, bundles of papyrus, the careful handwriting of scribes recording the pulse of an empire. What was documented in those vanished archives? Could they have held knowledge that surpassed contemporary Mediterranean understanding, offering glimpses of Atlantic islands, coastal civilizations, or navigation techniques long forgotten? Or were they largely mundane commercial records, now magnified in mystery by the absence of surviving evidence? The story of Carthage is a reminder that knowledge is fragile, and that the loss of a civilization can erase more than cities and armies. It can erase the very maps of understanding that connected the known world to the unknown. The Atlantic records may never resurface, yet their absence challenges us to question what the Carthaginians truly knew, and how close the modern world came to losing a window onto the wider Atlantic altogether. And so, the mystery remains, hovering over the coastline of time, inviting us to wonder, what secrets might the Carthaginians have recorded, and what has history's relentless tide buried forever beneath the waves? And as the secrets of lost Carthaginian records fade into the depths of the Atlantic, our journey moves northward, to the rolling hills of ancient Greece, where shadows linger over a sanctuary that drew initiates for centuries, yet left behind a veil of silence that continues to intrigue scholars and mystics alike. This is Eleusis, a town whose fame is inseparable from its sacred mysteries, where the rhythms of agriculture, death, and rebirth were intertwined in ceremonies that shaped the spiritual imagination of the ancient world. The approach to Eleusis from Athens is subtle, almost unassuming. Travelers of the classical era would have seen olive groves and gentle slopes leading toward the sanctuary, where a series of temples and halls welcomed those seeking initiation. Today, only fragments of foundations, scattered columns, and carved reliefs remain. Yet even these remnants hint at a complex and carefully orchestrated experience designed to immerse participants in a profound transformation. Stone steps, worn smooth by countless feet, lead into courtyards where processions may have once circled in ritual rhythm. One can almost hear the echo of chants, the murmurs of anticipation, the faint rustle of sacred garments as initiates moved through hidden chambers. The Eleusinian mysteries, celebrated from as early as the 7th century BC, were dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, the mother and daughter at the center of myths of life, death, and rebirth. What made these rites so alluring, so powerful, was precisely what was never recorded openly. Initiates were sworn to secrecy, bound by oaths that forbade them from revealing the ceremony's content. This deliberate concealment has left us with tantalizing fragments, references in plays, scattered inscriptions, and philosophical commentaries that speak of awe, terror, and revelation, but never in full detail. Ancient authors described the experience as transformative. Lucius Apuleius, writing centuries later, hints at initiates emerging from the ceremonies with a sense of illumination, having witnessed truths beyond ordinary comprehension. Plato makes allusions to the rites in his dialogues, emphasizing moral and spiritual insight. Yet, what did they actually see, hear, or taste within the sacred precincts? Was it an encounter with the divine, a carefully staged theatrical experience, or a combination of both? The rituals appear to have unfolded in stages. Preliminary purifications involved fasting and sacred journeys. Then, initiates were led through secret spaces beneath the sanctuary. Some suggest that a hall of revelation contained symbolic objects, images, or recitations intended to confront the initiate with mortality and the promise of renewal. Scholars debate whether psychoactive substances or sensory manipulations played a role, while others argue that the power lay in myth, repetition, and communal participation. Whatever the method, participants reportedly emerged profoundly changed, their understanding of life and death deepened by an experience that could not be fully communicated in words. Beyond the psychological and spiritual impact, the Eleusinian mysteries were also a social phenomenon. Every year, thousands of individuals, commoners and elites, men and women, even some foreigners, traveled to Eleusis to participate. The rites provided cohesion, a shared vision of the cycles of nature and human destiny. They connected the mundane world to cosmic rhythms, yet the secrecy surrounding them has made reconstructing their precise nature almost impossible. Speculative reconstructions, of course, abound. Some historians suggest that initiates were shown elaborate dramatizations of Persephone's descent into the underworld, culminating in her return, symbolizing the seasonal cycles of growth and harvest. Others argue for more esoteric experiences, direct encounters with sacred objects, recitations of hymns whose meaning was only revealed in the context of initiation. Could the rites have contained encoded knowledge about life, death, or cosmology? Insights that were intentionally withheld from the public to preserve their potency? Or were they primarily a profound psychological and communal experience, crafted to evoke awe and contemplation? Archaeology offers hints, but no definitive answers. Excavations at Eleusis reveal the Telesterion, a massive hall where initiates gathered, and surrounding temples that housed altars, inscriptions, and statues. Reliefs depict ritual processions and symbolic gestures, yet these images tantalize more than they explain. The mystery is compounded by the destruction and reconstruction of the site over centuries, including Roman restorations, which preserved form but may have altered ritual content. What remained secret in antiquity may have been lost entirely to time. The allure of the unknown lies not merely in what was done, but in what remains unspoken. Philosophers and mystics have long speculated on the power of secrecy itself, arguing that certain truths can only be apprehended through experience rather than exposition. In this way, the Eleusinian mysteries invite reflection not only on the ancient rites themselves, but on the human desire to encounter the sacred directly, to bridge the gap between ordinary perception and a deeper, ineffable reality. Standing today amid the ruins, one cannot escape a sense of temporal dislocation. The air seems thick with the echoes of chants and whispered oaths. Columns that once framed sacred spaces now jut skyward as silent witnesses to centuries of mystery. Initiates of the past emerged transformed. What remains for the modern observer is the question of what was lost in translation, in memory, and in deliberate secrecy. And so we are left with an enduring enigma. What truths were imparted to those who crossed the threshold of Eleusis, and what has history's silence preserved or obscured? Are the rites purely symbolic, or did they once contain wisdom now irretrievably hidden? The answers elude us, leaving only the possibility of wonder and the haunting sense that some mysteries, by design, are never meant to be fully revealed. And as the echoes of Eleusis fade into the hills of Attica, we turn our attention to a quieter, yet equally enigmatic realm, one of thought, numbers, and philosophy. In the bustling cities and coastal landscapes of 6th century BC Greece, a figure emerged whose influence would ripple through centuries, yet whose teachings were shrouded in secrecy. Pythagoras of Samos. Unlike temples or libraries, his knowledge was not carved in stone or written on papyrus. It was whispered, recited, and transmitted orally, a doctrine that now exists only in fragments, leaving modern scholars to reconstruct its scope from hints, anecdotes, and philosophical shadows. The journey begins in Croton, a city in southern Italy where Pythagoras established his school. Archaeological excavations suggest an urban landscape of modest dwellings, sanctuaries, and public spaces. But the true center of his community was not visible in the streets or marketplaces. It lay within the minds of the initiates, in secret gatherings where silence and discipline framed the transmission of ideas. Here, mathematics, music, and cosmology were not merely abstract concepts. They were instruments of spiritual and moral formation, a bridge between the tangible world and the unseen order governing it. Pythagoras himself is an elusive figure. Ancient sources describe him as a philosopher, a mystic, and a teacher of profound insight. Yet almost nothing he wrote survives. His doctrines, if they were ever recorded, were preserved orally and shared only with trusted disciples. According to later writers such as Porphyry and Iamblichus, the Pythagorean community observed strict rules. Initiates swore oaths of secrecy, and the study of numbers was not merely intellectual but deeply spiritual. Numbers were believed to underlie all reality, governing harmony, proportion, and even the soul's journey. What did this oral doctrine contain? Scholars speculate that it encompassed moral guidance, cosmological theories, and mathematical principles now foundational to Western thought. The Pythagoreans are credited with early discoveries in geometry and number theory, the concept of numerical ratios in music, and notions of the harmony of the spheres. Yet, because the teachings were oral, much of the philosophical system remains inaccessible, reconstructed indirectly from later interpretations. Was there more? Wisdom intentionally withheld? Insights too delicate or potent to be written down? The secrecy of the Pythagorean school was deliberate. Initiates were said to undergo rigorous training in silence, meditation, and discipline before accessing higher knowledge. Philosophers later claimed that the oral doctrine contained ethical and mystical teachings on the immortality of the soul, the purification of character, and the alignment of human life with cosmic order. Some sources hint at numerological symbolism, mystical rites, or even esoteric rituals, yet the precise content is unknown. Could these elements have shaped a worldview that integrated mathematics, ethics, and spirituality in a way no surviving text can fully convey? The loss of the original oral doctrine deepens when considering the fate of the Pythagorean community. Political upheavals, social conflicts, and violent suppression of their gatherings in Croton and other cities may have fractured the school, scattering disciples and eroding continuity. In this way, the doctrine's disappearance is not merely accidental, it is entwined with the turbulence of history itself. What vanished with these oral teachings may include insights into the cosmos, human consciousness, and moral philosophy that could have illuminated connections we can only glimpse today. Modern reconstructions rely heavily on secondary sources, Plato's dialogues, Aristotle's critiques, and later Neoplatonist interpretations. Yet these accounts are filtered through centuries of interpretation and often emphasize philosophical debate rather than the original Pythagorean experience. Some researchers suggest that allegorical language in these texts may hint at practices and insights deliberately veiled, accessible only to initiates attuned to the oral tradition. Could the Pythagoreans have developed a sophisticated system of knowledge encoded in sound, rhythm, and symbolic instruction, imperceptible to outsiders? Speculative theories abound, bridging mathematics, music, and metaphysics. Certain historians propose that Pythagoras' emphasis on numerical relationships in music and geometry may have been part of a broader mystical framework, an understanding of cosmic harmony that linked ethical behavior to the mathematical structure of reality. Other theorists suggest that fragments of this oral doctrine may have influenced later Hermetic traditions, mystery schools, and esoteric philosophies throughout the Mediterranean world. Yet these claims remain circumstantial, leaving the original doctrine tantalizingly out of reach. Standing today in southern Italy, near the sites associated with Pythagoras' school, one can imagine initiates gathered in quiet halls, chanting, meditating, and learning in disciplined silence. Columns of modest stone may still mark the footprints of a vanished community, but the true architecture of knowledge, oral, secret, and profound, exists only in memory and speculation. The doctrines were designed to be heard, absorbed, and internalized, not read. Their disappearance reminds us that some forms of knowledge are fragile, ephemeral, and inseparable from the act of transmission itself. And so the mystery persists. What precisely did Pythagoras teach to his disciples, and what has been irretrievably lost to time? Was the oral doctrine a map of the cosmos, a guide to the soul, or a combination of ethics, mathematics, and mystical insight beyond our comprehension? Perhaps the true content remains hidden in the interplay between silence and speech, between disciplined memory and the unpredictable currents of history. The vanished oral doctrine of Pythagoras continues to challenge us to reflect on the limits of what can be known. In the absence of written records, we are left with questions that hover between history, philosophy, and legend. What secrets of number, harmony, and the universe were once whispered in that distant hall? And what traces of them, if any, still echo in the structures of thought we inherit today? The search for understanding continues, inviting contemplation of a knowledge both ancient and elusive, a mystery whose depth may never be fully plumbed. And as the whispers of Pythagoras's vanished teachings fade into the philosophical air of ancient Greece, we now journey eastward to the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates carve a landscape that once harbored one of humanity's earliest and most sophisticated civilizations. Here, in the bustling cities of Babylon and Nippur, amidst ziggurats and ceremonial courts, a legend emerged that would captivate imaginations for millennia: the Tablet of Destinies. The scene is both awe-inspiring and haunting. Imagine a massive temple complex, its mud brick walls glistening under the sun, adorned with bas-reliefs depicting gods, celestial symbols, and kings receiving divine favor. Within such sanctuaries, scribes meticulously etched cuneiform into clay tablets, recording economic transactions, religious hymns, and royal decrees. Among these, some texts carried a far deeper significance, a symbolic authority, the claim to shape fate itself. The Tablet of Destinies, according to myth, was not merely a record. It was a tool of cosmic governance, granting whoever held it the power to decree the order of the universe. Ancient Mesopotamian sources, including the Enuma Elish and other Akkadian epics, describe the tablet in dramatic terms. Possession of the Tablet of Destinies implied absolute authority over gods and mortals alike. It could confer kingship, dictate the outcomes of battles, and influence the flow of human and divine events. Such a device may have been imagined as divine, yet it was rooted in a culture that deeply valued writing as a medium of power. Cuneiform inscriptions were not only records, they were instruments of control, binding words to reality in a manner both spiritual and practical. Historical scholarship suggests that the Tablet of Destinies may have a basis in real ritual and administrative practice. Babylonian kings used clay tablets to formalize contracts, treaties, and decrees, each one considered sacred in its own right. Yet the myth elevates this concept into the realm of the extraordinary, a singular, ultimate tablet that determines destiny itself. Could such a device ever have existed, perhaps as a symbolic object, a tablet kept in a temple, treated as a repository of divine law and cosmic balance? Or is it entirely allegorical, a metaphor for the inescapable order imposed by the gods? The mystery deepens when considering the legends of theft and struggle surrounding the tablet. Texts recount that gods themselves engaged in battles to seize it. In one myth, the demoness Tiamat rises against the younger gods, and control of the Tablet of Destinies becomes pivotal in determining the outcome of the cosmic conflict. Such stories hint at a conception of fate as both tangible and contested, a force that could be wielded, stolen, or lost. Were these narratives purely mythological, or did they encode ritual knowledge about power, kingship, and the sacred responsibilities of authority? Archaeology provides tantalizing, if fragmentary, evidence. Clay tablets and cylinder seals from the old Babylonian period reveal elaborate ritual formulas, invocations of divine favor, and symbols suggesting that certain texts held more than mere information. They were considered conduits of power. Could one or more tablets have been treated as uniquely authoritative, functioning as a ritual focal point for affirming kingship and ensuring cosmic stability? And if so, what happened to them? The repeated destruction and rebuilding of Babylon by invading armies and internal revolts likely consumed any central repository. The tangible artifact, if it ever existed, vanished centuries ago. Some scholars propose a more speculative layer. Could the Tablet of Destinies, or its conceptual analogues, have contained knowledge about astronomy, astrology, or early mathematics, knowledge that allowed priests to predict celestial patterns, seasonal cycles, or even human events? Babylonian scribes were remarkably advanced, recording planetary movements and eclipses with precision. The line between practical record-keeping and divine symbolism was often blurred. Perhaps the destiny inscribed on these tablets was as much a record of cosmic patterns as it was a theological assertion. Yet the more we examine the myths, the more elusive the truth becomes. Even detailed cuneiform texts cannot fully convey what the ancients believed. Modern reconstructions rely on interpretation, comparing epic tales, legal texts, and temple inscriptions. And still, the Tablet of Destinies resists precise definition. Was it a singular physical object, a symbolic concept, or a combination of both? Did it ever exist in the world of human hands, or was it always meant to inhabit a realm beyond reach, a bridge between human ambition and divine order? Standing today near the ruins of Babylon, among crumbling ziggurats and scattered clay fragments, it is difficult not to imagine a time when such a tablet might have existed, etched by meticulous scribes, preserved in sacred halls, guarded with ritual care. One can picture priests reciting its decrees, kings affirming their power before the gods, and the collective belief that destiny itself could be written, sealed, and transmitted. And yet, whatever the reality, the tablet's disappearance only heightens its fascination. It reminds us that in ancient civilizations, knowledge, power, and myth were often inseparable. Objects and texts could be both practical and sacred, their destruction echoing as a loss not only of material culture, but of conceptual understanding. The Tablet of Destinies may have been lost to fire, conquest, or the erosion of time, but its presence lingers in the imagination, in literature, and in the unbroken human fascination with the forces that govern fate. We are left, then, with the profound question: if such a tablet truly existed, what secrets did it contain? Was it a record of cosmic law, a tool of divine authority, or a symbolic reminder of humanity's fragile position in the universe? And if lost, might some trace of its knowledge still survive in ritual, text, or memory, waiting for a future discovery to illuminate a mystery that has endured for more than 2 millennia? And as the echoes of Babylonian destiny fade across the Fertile Crescent, our journey moves eastward once more, into the rugged plains and highlands of ancient Persia, where a priestly class held knowledge so profound it was said to be forbidden even to the uninitiated. The Magi, keepers of sacred fire and cosmic secrets, preserved teachings that described the structure of the universe, the movements of the stars, and the hidden forces that governed existence itself. These doctrines, passed down through generations, were whispered in sanctuaries, studied in secret, and veiled from the eyes of outsiders. The landscape itself evokes the gravity of their mystery. Imagine a sunlit plateau where jagged mountains rise against the horizon and rivers wind through fertile valleys, nourishing cities and fields alike. Here, among ziggurats and fire temples, the Magi would have gathered under the gaze of the heavens, their eyes tracing constellations, their minds mapping celestial patterns invisible to ordinary observers. Each star, each planetary movement, was thought to correspond to forces on Earth, ethical, spiritual, and political. Could it be that these priests saw connections that modern science has only begun to recognize, encoded in symbolic forms that remain elusive to us? Our understanding of the Magi comes primarily from Greek and Roman sources, such as Herodotus, who described them as wise and secretive, skilled in astrology, divination, and ritual. They were intermediaries between humans and Ahura Mazda, the supreme creator, guiding kings and communities with counsel that blended moral philosophy and cosmological insight. Yet even these historical accounts are filtered through outsiders, observers who could glimpse practice but rarely penetrate its inner meaning. Central to the enigma is the Magi's cosmology. Unlike the structured systems later formalized in Hellenistic or medieval thought, their understanding appears to have integrated ethical imperatives, spiritual principles, and observations of the natural world. They divided the universe into realms of light and darkness, truth and falsehood, viewing existence as a dynamic struggle between forces both visible and hidden. Could it be that this forbidden cosmology encompassed mathematical or astronomical knowledge as well, encoded symbolically to preserve secrecy? Some historians speculate that the Magi may have possessed sophisticated techniques for predicting eclipses, solstices, or planetary alignments, knowledge deemed too powerful or sacred for ordinary use. The secrecy surrounding these teachings only deepens the mystery. Initiates were sworn to silence. Their oaths were binding, sacred, and lifelong. Knowledge was transmitted orally, and only through disciplined apprenticeship could a student comprehend the full scope of the doctrines. Some sources hint that parts of the Magi's wisdom were deliberately concealed from kings, ensuring that only the spiritually prepared could access the deepest truths. In such a system, the line between science, religion, and philosophy was blurred, an inseparable unity of observation, ritual, and morality. Archaeology offers hints but few certainties. Fire temples, ceremonial altars, and inscriptions survive, yet none can fully reveal the knowledge once contained within the minds of the Magi. Zoroastrian texts preserved later, such as the Avesta, carry echoes of cosmological concepts, moral dualities, and esoteric wisdom, yet these are filtered through centuries of reconstruction after invasions, conquests, and the passage of time. The original system, the so-called forbidden cosmology, remains largely inaccessible, leaving us to speculate on its depth and sophistication. Some scholars propose that the Magi may have developed symbolic systems for encoding astronomical cycles, moral principles, or ethical laws in ritualized forms. Could certain rites, recitations, or patterns of observation have served as mnemonic devices, a way of preserving knowledge without writing it down? If so, the destruction of libraries, the passage of empires, and the scattering of priestly lineages could have erased a vast corpus of understanding that bridged the human and divine, the temporal and eternal. Speculative traditions extend even further. Some suggest that the Magi's cosmology influenced later Greek philosophers, Hermetic thinkers, and even early Islamic scholars, seeding ideas about dualism, fate, and cosmic order into a broader intellectual landscape. Could fragments of forbidden knowledge have survived, transformed, and integrated into systems far removed from their original context? Or were these doctrines meant to remain ephemeral, experienced rather than codified, vanishing when the initiated passed from the world? Standing today amid the ruins of ancient Persian sanctuaries, one can almost sense the weight of invisible knowledge. Columns and altars may crumble, and stone inscriptions may fade, but the intellectual and spiritual framework once maintained by the Magi persists as a shadow, a reminder of a worldview where morality, observation, and the cosmos were inseparable. One imagines initiates gazing at the stars, contemplating the balance of light and dark, and recording truths they were forbidden to share. What they saw, understood, or intuited remains a secret woven into the fabric of history. And yet, the mystery of the Magi's forbidden cosmology continues to haunt scholars, historians, and seekers alike. Were their teachings purely symbolic, or did they contain empirical observations of the natural and celestial worlds that surpass our current understanding? How much knowledge was lost with the passage of centuries, through conquest, dispersion, or the deliberate silence of the initiated? Could there still be fragments hidden in texts, inscriptions, or traditions, waiting to be recognized as remnants of a system that once unified cosmic law, moral duty, and spiritual insight? In the end, the legacy of the Persian Magi is not simply in what they wrote, preserved, or left behind. It is in the invitation to wonder, to consider that there once existed a body of knowledge so profound and so secret that it was guarded by oaths, transmitted orally across generations, and possibly lost to history. What remains hidden in that cosmology, and how much might the world have glimpsed if it had survived intact? Perhaps the answers are beyond our reach, but the questions themselves continue to guide the imagination, drawing us into the mysteries of a civilization that sought to map not only the stars, but the very destiny of existence. And as the secrets of ancient Persia linger in the mind, our journey turns once more to the land of the Nile, where the desert meets the river and the first glimmers of civilization arose in measured stone and sun-baked mud. Here, amid the towering monuments of Memphis and the pyramids of Saqqara, one figure emerges whose wisdom transcended his era: Imhotep. Revered as architect, physician, and advisor, Imhotep's name survives, but much of his knowledge, the teachings that may have shaped the foundations of Egyptian thought, remains unrecorded, lost to the sands of time. The landscape itself evokes awe. Saqqara stretches in long, undulating ridges, punctuated by tombs and mastabas, each aligned with precision and imbued with symbolic meaning. The step pyramid of Djoser rises against the horizon, a testament to ambition, engineering, and perhaps the mind of Imhotep himself. Imagine him walking these grounds, observing the flow of the Nile, noting the stars that guide agricultural cycles, and pondering the alignment of stone and spirit. What thoughts passed through his mind that were never inscribed on papyrus or etched into walls? What knowledge did he pass orally, only to vanish with the generations that followed? Imhotep lived during the Third Dynasty, around 2650 BC, a period when Egypt was consolidating its power, its religion, and its understanding of the natural world. Historical records credit him with designing the Step Pyramid, a revolutionary architectural achievement, and serving as chief advisor to Pharaoh Djoser. Later traditions elevated him to divine status, associating him with healing, wisdom, and learning. Yet, despite this reverence, the majority of his intellectual contributions, particularly the teachings he may have offered to scribes, priests, and students, remain unrecorded. Contemporary sources suggest that Imhotep's expertise spanned multiple domains. As an architect, he understood geometry, proportion, and the symbolic resonance of form. As a physician, he may have compiled knowledge of anatomy, disease, and herbal remedies long before systematic medical texts were codified. Some scholars speculate that he developed techniques for aligning structures with celestial events, integrating cosmology with construction, ethics with mathematics. Yet, if any written records once existed, they have not survived. Were these teachings deliberately kept secret, reserved for initiates of a priestly order, or simply lost to decay, theft, or destruction? Ancient Egyptian culture placed extraordinary value on the spoken word and ritual transmission of knowledge. Priests recited liturgies and instructions to apprentices, embedding philosophical and practical teachings within performance and memorization. Could Imhotep have employed similar methods? Perhaps his wisdom was conveyed through demonstration, conversation, or ritualized practice, leaving no tangible trace but shaping generations of scribes and engineers who internalized his insights. Some later sources hint at esoteric dimensions to his knowledge. Texts from the New Kingdom portray Imhotep as a master of magical and sacred knowledge, a figure capable of bridging the earthly and divine. Was this mythologizing purely symbolic, or did it preserve fragments of a genuine teaching tradition? Did he encode principles of medicine, astronomy, or ethics within allegory and ritual, accessible only to those initiated into his school of thought? And if so, what might have been lost when these oral teachings were interrupted or forgotten? The mystery deepens when we consider the transmission of his influence. Greek historians such as Manetho and later authors describe Imhotep as a sage whose work inspired intellectuals for centuries. Some Egyptian texts suggest that he may have instructed future generations of scribes and architects, yet these instructions are never detailed. Could it be that Imhotep's real legacy lay not in physical artifacts, but in a web of knowledge passed down orally, subtly shaping the evolution of Egyptian science, medicine, and religious thought? Archaeology provides tantalizing hints, but no definitive answers. Excavations at Saqqara reveal workshops, storage areas, and spaces that may have served as centers of learning. Reliefs depict figures in careful instruction, yet these images tell us little of content or method. The absence of written treatises suggests that much of what Imhotep knew was never meant to be recorded, or that subsequent generations were unable to preserve it through tumultuous centuries of dynastic change. Could there have been texts, lost in floods, fires, or invasions, that contained systematic knowledge of medicine, astronomy, or philosophy, attributed to him only in legend? Speculative interpretations extend further. Some historians propose that Imhotep's teachings may have included sophisticated insights into the natural world, predating later Greek science. Could he have recognized principles of geometry, hydraulics, or even proto-astronomy in ways that influenced both practical engineering and spiritual understanding? Others suggest that his medical knowledge, immortalized in fragmentary references, could have encompassed treatments and theories long forgotten, encoded in methods taught orally rather than written. In either case, the absence of records invites both fascination and frustration, leaving a legacy partially visible and partially shrouded. Consider the symbolic weight of unrecorded knowledge. In Egyptian thought, the spoken word, ritual action, and memory were as powerful as ink on papyrus. Imhotep's wisdom may have been designed for human minds rather than stone or scroll, transmitted carefully to ensure comprehension and application. What principles, observations, or philosophical insights were lost when the chain of oral transmission was broken? Could they have contained understanding of the universe, the human body, or the moral order that remains unmatched in surviving texts? Standing amid the ruins of Saqqara today, one is struck by the magnitude of what is absent. Stone, mud brick, and hieroglyphs endure, yet the voice of Imhotep, the teacher, innovator, and sage, remains silent. We are left to reconstruct his impact through architectural genius, fragmented texts, and later mythological reverence. The contrast between the tangible monuments and the intangible teachings underscores the fragile nature of knowledge and how easily it can vanish even in a civilization as enduring as Egypt. And so, we are confronted with a profound question. What exactly did Imhotep teach, and how much of that wisdom was irretrievably lost? Was his unrecorded knowledge a collection of practical skills, philosophical insight, or spiritual understanding? Or did it combine all these elements in ways we can scarcely imagine? The monuments stand as reminders, but the teachings themselves have slipped through time's fingers, leaving only traces, echoes, and the haunting sense of what might still lie hidden beneath the sands of history. In contemplating the unrecorded teachings of Imhotep, we are invited to reflect not only on the limits of historical preservation, but on the mysteries that persist at the heart of human endeavor. What truths, waiting in the minds of ancient sages, have vanished with the generations that once carried them? And could some fragment of Imhotep's wisdom yet survive, embedded subtly in later knowledge, guiding those who seek to understand a world long lost to memory? And as the sun sets over the ancient sands of Egypt, leaving the memory of Imhotep's lost teachings lingering in the air, our journey now moves northwest across the Mediterranean to the hills and plains of pre-Roman Italy. Here, in the lands that would one day be dominated by Rome, a civilization thrived in relative secrecy: the Etruscans. Known for their art, engineering, and enigmatic inscriptions, they developed a system of discipline, ritual, and knowledge that would come to terrify Rome itself, leaving only whispers and fragments behind, tantalizing modern historians with the shadow of what was lost. The Etruscan heartland stretches across the modern regions of Tuscany, Lazio, and Umbria. Picture rolling hills dotted with stone tombs, necropolises carved into rock, and cities with streets and drainage systems of remarkable sophistication. Within these settlements, Etruscan priests, nobles, and initiates practiced rites that fused civic governance with spiritual observation, blending law, astronomy, and morality into a framework that outsiders found both compelling and unsettling. What was it about this discipline that so unnerved the burgeoning power of Rome? And why has so little of it survived intact? Rome's fear of the Etruscans was not merely military, it was intellectual and spiritual. The Etruscans maintained a strict religious and civic order, guided by augurs, haruspices, and ritual experts who interpreted the will of the gods through omens, celestial movements, and sacred texts. These practices were often secret, codified orally, and transmitted within select groups, limiting access to outsiders. Roman historians note that the Etruscans possessed knowledge of the heavens and the laws of nature that seemed almost supernatural to the Roman elite. Could it be that their discipline encompassed principles of governance, social organization, and natural philosophy that Rome found threatening? Archaeological evidence hints at the complexity of this system. Tombs in Cerveteri, Tarquinia, and Veii reveal intricate wall paintings, inscriptions, and symbolic motifs that suggest ritual knowledge intertwined with daily life. The Etruscans' written language, largely undeciphered, further obscures our understanding. While we can read certain funerary inscriptions and public decrees, the core of their knowledge, the so-called discipline that inspired both awe and fear, remains inaccessible. Did these texts contain moral instruction, political theory, or esoteric cosmology that Rome sought to suppress or could not comprehend? Historical accounts suggest that the Etruscan discipline was multi-layered. Initiates learned rites of purification, the reading of celestial signs, and moral teachings designed to integrate individual behavior with the collective order. The discipline also extended into leadership, advising rulers on the alignment of civic policy with divine will. Roman observers were often mystified or alarmed, interpreting these practices as arcane, potentially subversive, or dangerously effective. Could the Etruscan approach to law and governance have allowed a society to function in ways Rome had not yet mastered, threatening the stability of emerging Roman institutions? One particularly fascinating aspect is the Etruscans' mastery of augury and divination. Birds, lightning, and the entrails of sacrificial animals were observed meticulously, and interpretations were recorded in ritual manuals accessible only to trained priests. Some scholars speculate that these rituals were not mere superstition, but early forms of systematic observation, blending natural phenomena with social order. Could their discipline have encoded knowledge of the seasons, celestial cycles, or even human behavior in ways that informed their society at every level? If so, the erosion of these records and the Roman conquest that followed would have erased a body of knowledge unmatched in the ancient Mediterranean. Yet, much of what we know, or think we know, comes filtered through Roman sources. Livy, Pliny, and other chroniclers describe the Etruscans' rituals with a mixture of respect and fear. They emphasize secrecy, power, and apparent mysticism, but rarely provide detail. Was this an exaggeration to highlight Rome's eventual triumph, or an accurate reflection of the Etruscans' intentional concealment? Perhaps the discipline was as much a psychological tool as a spiritual or civic framework, a method of consolidating authority and cultivating obedience and moral rigor among citizens. Speculative theories abound. Some historians propose that the Etruscans' knowledge may have included advanced understanding of hydraulics, astronomy, and architectural engineering, combined with ethical and spiritual guidance. Could their discipline have integrated science, philosophy, and religion in ways Rome found threatening because it empowered the populace with insight that bypassed the nascent Roman political hierarchy? Others suggest that aspects of the discipline were deliberately obscured, transmitted orally or symbolically to prevent misuse or misinterpretation. In either case, the discipline seems to have been holistic, a system that harmonized the human, the divine, and the civic spheres into a coherent yet deliberately veiled practice. The disappearance of this knowledge is as telling as its content. Roman expansion, assimilation, and cultural dominance eroded Etruscan society over centuries. Temples were repurposed, inscriptions defaced, and rituals abandoned. What remained were fragments, artifacts, inscriptions, and tantalizing historical accounts, echoes of a discipline that once shaped cities, guided rulers, and inspired both reverence and fear. What precisely was lost when this body of knowledge vanished? Was it a form of early science, a moral framework, a spiritual system, or all three intertwined in ways no single source can fully convey? Walking today through the rolling hills and silent necropolises of Etruria, one can almost imagine the disciplined communities of initiates, moving with ritualized precision, observing omens, and maintaining a social order that fused cosmic understanding with civic life. Columns and tombs endure, decorated with images of ceremonies, but the voices of the teachers, the rhythm of the lessons, the unseen structure of their discipline, these remain silent. The fear that Rome carried away with conquest, preserved in legend, only hints at the depth of what the Etruscans once held. And so, we are left with an enduring enigma. What was the true nature of the Etruscan discipline, and why did Rome fear it so profoundly? Could fragments of their teachings have survived, hidden in ritual, art, or the remnants of their cities, waiting to be understood? Or did the conquest and assimilation of their society erase a system of knowledge and governance unmatched in the ancient world? The mystery of the Etruscan discipline invites reflection on the fragility of knowledge and the power of secrecy. It reminds us that civilizations can wield authority not only through armies or monuments, but through understanding, observation, and spiritual insight. What precisely did the Etruscans know that Rome could not tolerate? And how much of their wisdom, if any, continues to echo faintly through the artifacts, inscriptions, and myths they left behind? The questions linger, haunting the hills and tombs of Etruria, and beckoning us to wonder what secrets, lost to history, might still lie waiting beneath the surface. And as the echoes of Etruscan secrecy fade into the hills of central Italy, our journey turns once more to the cradle of civilization, to the alluvial plains of southern Mesopotamia, where the city of Ur rose along the banks of the Euphrates. Here, in a landscape shaped by fertile soil and seasonal floods, the Sumerians developed a remarkable system of thought that bridged the natural and supernatural, a method of interpreting dreams that sought to illuminate the hidden currents of human life and the divine will. In Ur, Dreams were not mere illusions. They were messages, signs, and warnings encoded in symbols that required careful study and careful minds to decipher. Imagine walking through the streets of around 2100 BC, past mud brick houses, ceremonial courtyards, and towering ziggurats, their steps aligned precisely to the stars. The city pulses with the rhythm of daily life, merchants exchanging goods, priests performing rituals, and scribes meticulously etching cuneiform tablets that would preserve knowledge for posterity. But in the quiet chambers of temples, away from the bustle of the streets, priests and seers practiced a subtler art, interpreting the visions that visited sleepers, seeking to understand not only the individual mind, but the forces of fate, fortune, and divine favor that shaped the city itself. The Sumerian dream interpretation system was both practical and mystical. Tablets recovered by archaeologists reveal lists of dream motifs paired with their corresponding outcomes. To dream of a lion, for example, might signify strength or danger. A river could indicate transition, fortune, or threat. Yet these interpretations were never arbitrary. They were embedded in a worldview where the gods, ancestors, and cosmic order communicated through subtle signs. Was this system purely symbolic, or did it represent an early attempt to understand psychology, prediction, and causality? Could the Sumerians, through careful observation, have discerned patterns in human behavior and circumstance that seem almost prophetic? The process of interpretation required skill, patience, and discretion. Dream interpreters, often priests or scholars, would meet with the dreamer, recording the vision and its context, the dreamer's social position, health, and recent events. The symbols were then analyzed, often in consultation with written lists or mnemonic devices, to reveal guidance or warnings. Some interpretations were immediate, offering advice on matters of agriculture, trade, or politics. Others addressed moral or spiritual concerns, indicating divine favor or disapproval. In a society where omens were taken seriously, such insights could influence kings, judges, and ordinary citizens alike. Yet much of this knowledge was fragile, preserved in fragile clay tablets that survived floods, invasions, and the passage of millennia by chance alone. Many of the interpretations that have come down to us are fragmentary, leaving gaps filled only by educated conjecture. Scholars debate whether the system relied on a codified methodology or a more intuitive, context-dependent approach. Did the interpreters possess a kind of proto-scientific insight into the human mind, or was their authority derived entirely from the sacred status of their role and the perceived presence of the gods? Perhaps it was both, a fusion of observation and divine mediation. The significance of dream interpretation in Sumerian culture cannot be overstated. Kings consulted dream interpreters before military campaigns. Families sought guidance on childbirth and inheritance. Merchants interpreted visions to decide when to trade. Dreams functioned as a bridge between human experience and cosmic order, a mechanism by which the invisible forces of the universe were rendered intelligible. Could the Sumerians' meticulous attention to dream symbolism represent one of the earliest attempts to codify human experience and divine communication into a structured system of knowledge? Archaeological finds in including tablet archives from the royal cemetery and temple libraries, reveal that dream interpretation was deeply intertwined with other forms of scholarship: astrology, divination, medicine, and ritual practice. The Sumerians believed that the gods could communicate not only through omens in nature, but also through the inner visions of sleeping minds. In this sense, the city itself became a laboratory for understanding the interface between human cognition and cosmic authority. Was there an underlying methodology that governed these interpretations? A framework lost to time, or was the system inherently fluid, adapting to circumstance and context with each dreamer? Speculative theories extend the intrigue. Some modern researchers suggest that the Sumerian system may have preserved insights into psychological patterns, even emotional intelligence, long before formal study of the mind emerged. Could their attention to narrative, symbolism, and context have allowed interpreters to anticipate events or detect underlying social dynamics in ways that seem astonishingly sophisticated? Others propose that the dream system was deeply spiritual, a sacred method for discerning moral and ethical truths from divine revelation. Perhaps both dimensions coexisted, the practical and the mystical, intertwined in ways that modern observers struggle to reconstruct. The fragility of this knowledge adds to its mystique. Tablets were baked and stored carefully, yet centuries of conquest, environmental change, and neglect scattered archives across deserts, rivers, and museums. What has survived represents only a fraction of what once existed. The lost tablets, the forgotten mnemonic methods, and the oral traditions of dream interpreters. These may have contained insights that could illuminate both human nature and the cosmos in ways still inaccessible to us. Can we, through fragments and speculation, glimpse the sophistication of a system that treated dreams not as fantasies, but as windows into fate itself? Walking today among the ruins of Ur, one can almost sense the voices of ancient interpreters, quietly recording visions, murmuring their analyses, and guiding kings and citizens alike. The ziggurats loom overhead as silent witnesses, their shadows stretching across streets once filled with commerce, ceremony, and contemplation. The Sumerian dream interpretation system is a reminder of how human curiosity and spiritual seeking converged into practical, ritualized frameworks, blending observation, intuition, and sacred authority. And yet, the mystery persists. What insights did these interpreters truly possess, and how much has been irretrievably lost to time? Were their methods purely symbolic, practical, or a combination of both? Did the fragments we possess hint at a system of knowledge that could reveal patterns of human behavior, divine favor, or even the workings of fate itself? The questions linger, unanswerable yet profoundly compelling, inviting reflection on the delicate boundary between the known and the unknowable. In contemplating the Sumerian dream interpretation system of Ur, we are confronted with an enduring enigma, a civilization capable of recording kings' decrees, building monumental architecture, and mapping the heavens, yet also attuned to the fleeting, intimate visions of the sleeping mind. What remains hidden in those visions? And what secrets of human perception and divine order vanished along with the clay tablets? Perhaps the answers lie buried beneath layers of soil and time, or perhaps they endure only in the shadows, whispered through the imagination, compelling us to wonder at the profound mystery of dreams as a window into both history and the human soul. And as the echoes of Sumerian dreams fade along the banks of the Euphrates, our journey now turns southward, across deserts and mountains, to the arid expanse of the Arabian Peninsula. Long before the rise of Islam, this land of shifting sands, jagged wadis, and ancient oases was home to a rich tapestry of belief, myth, and hidden knowledge. Among the most enigmatic of these traditions were the so-called Books of the Jinn, texts and teachings said to contain insight into the unseen, the spiritual, and the otherworldly forces that inhabit the world alongside humanity. Picture the Arabian desert at dusk, the sky a palette of deep crimson and violet, the wind whispering through dunes and rocky outcrops. Caravan trails wind through valleys, leading to settlements where traders, scholars, and mystics meet. In the quiet of these settlements, scholars and adepts are said to have preserved knowledge of the Jinn, beings described as invisible, intelligent, and capable of influence in the human realm. Unlike ordinary folklore, these books were purportedly systematic, offering methods for understanding, communicating with, and perhaps even commanding these forces. Yet their contents remain largely mysterious, with only fragments and hearsay surviving the centuries. Historical references to the books of the Jinn appear in later Islamic and pre-Islamic sources, though their existence is shrouded in uncertainty. Scholars suggest that these texts may have combined elements of ritual practice, cosmology, astrology, and moral instruction, forming a cohesive framework for engaging with the unseen. In the tribal societies of pre-Islamic Arabia, where oral tradition reigned supreme, such knowledge would have been highly guarded, transmitted only to those deemed worthy or prepared to wield it responsibly. How much of this knowledge was symbolic, meant to guide ethical behavior, and how much described phenomena that observers of the time experienced as real and interactive? The content of these books, as suggested by surviving references, was diverse and complex. They reportedly contained instructions for interpreting signs, understanding invisible influences on human affairs, and mediating between the human and Jinn realms. Some texts were concerned with protection, talismans, incantations, and ritual acts designed to prevent harm from unseen entities. Others delved into esoteric knowledge, offering guidance on hidden correspondences between the natural and spiritual worlds. Could these texts have represented an early form of systematic metaphysics, blending observation, ritual, and ethical guidance into a unified practice? The physical manifestation of the books of the Jinn remains elusive. Archaeologists have yet to uncover a definitive manuscript, and most surviving mentions come from oral histories, commentaries, and later manuscripts describing their supposed content. This absence raises questions. Were the books ever written down extensively, or were they primarily oral, with the books functioning as conceptual frameworks rather than tangible texts? If written, were they destroyed, hidden, or scattered across the deserts to prevent misuse? The uncertainty surrounding their form only amplifies the mystery, inviting speculation about the sophistication and depth of their teachings. The cultural context of pre-Islamic Arabia helps illuminate why such texts might have existed and been valued. Life in the desert demanded vigilance, foresight, and knowledge of natural and social forces. Belief in Jinn, beings capable of influencing weather, health, fortune, and conflict, offered a framework for understanding unpredictable events. The books of the Jinn may have codified centuries of observation, ritual practice, and ethical instruction into systems designed to navigate both visible and invisible realities. Could these texts have contained knowledge that was at once practical, spiritual, and philosophical, offering insights into both human behavior and the nature of the unseen? Speculative accounts suggest that the books were organized with careful logic, combining narrative, symbolism, and instruction. Some describe categorization of different types of jinn: benevolent, malevolent, or neutral, and methods for discerning their presence and intentions. Others hint at techniques for influencing or negotiating with these entities, using words, ritual actions, and symbolic objects. Whether these methods reflect genuine interaction with unseen forces or metaphorical guidance on human psychology and social relations is a question that remains unresolved. Archaeological and textual evidence hints at the broader intellectual landscape in which these books existed. Temples, shrines, and ceremonial spaces throughout the Arabian Peninsula indicate that spiritual practices were deeply intertwined with civic and personal life. Knowledge of the Jinn and the unseen order they represented may have been part of a sophisticated system of wisdom, ethics, and ritual. Could these books have also contained astronomical, meteorological, or natural observations encoded within spiritual allegory, allowing their practitioners to understand the world in ways both practical and mystical? The transmission of this knowledge was likely fragile. Oral instruction, secretive rites, and small initiatory groups would have preserved the teachings for a time, but the passage of centuries, combined with social and political upheavals, has left little trace. What might have survived are scattered references, fragments quoted in later texts, and the enduring cultural memory of beings that dwell unseen alongside humanity. Yet the absence of complete manuscripts only deepens the allure. The books of the Jinn represent a wisdom lost, tantalizingly hinted at, but never fully recovered. Walking today across the deserts of Arabia, one can imagine the gatherings of scholars and mystics beneath the stars, tracing patterns in the heavens, reciting incantations, and transmitting knowledge that bridged the human and the unseen. The wind over the dunes could carry the echoes of ritual chants, instruction, or dialogue with entities invisible to the eye. The landscape itself, harsh, beautiful, and eternal, serves as a silent witness to knowledge that may have shaped lives, guided decisions, and mediated human interaction with forces beyond ordinary perception. And yet, the mystery persists. Were the books of the Jinn purely symbolic guides for ethical and social conduct, or did they encode practical knowledge of forces that were observed and experienced? How much was lost when oral traditions faded, manuscripts were destroyed, or knowledge was deliberately concealed? Could fragments survive today, hidden in references, artifacts, or in the subtle continuities of local spiritual practice? In contemplating the pre-Islamic Arabian books of the Jinn, we confront the enduring question of what humanity once knew about the unseen, and how civilizations navigate the boundary between knowledge and mystery. What truths, long obscured by time and silence, might these texts have contained? And what remains hidden, still waiting beneath the sands, to illuminate a world that once understood existence as a complex interplay between the seen and the unseen, the mortal and the supernatural? And as the deserts of Arabia give way to the echoes of unseen forces, our journey now sweeps across the Mediterranean to the rugged landscapes and sun-drenched islands of ancient Greece. Here, in sanctuaries carved into cliffs, groves shaded by olive trees, and the marble halls of early temples, a mystery of cosmic proportions once captured the minds of poets, mystics, and initiates alike, the Orphic cosmic egg doctrine. This original version, preserved in fragments and whispered in the Orphic hymns, presents a vision of creation unlike any other, a universe born from a singular radiant egg, encasing the totality of existence within its luminous shell. Imagine the Aegean at dawn, mist rising from tranquil waters, sunlight fracturing against limestone cliffs, and the distant hum of waves breaking upon the shore. In these liminal spaces, devotees of Orphic mysteries gathered, reciting chants that invoked primordial forces, seeking understanding of the cosmos and their place within it. The cosmic egg, a symbol of origin and unity, was said to contain within its core the potential for all things: light and dark, life and death, chaos and order. How did these early mystics conceive such an image? And what truths might they have glimpsed about the structure of existence itself? The doctrine itself is notoriously elusive. Orphic texts, often preserved in scattered papyri, inscriptions, and later commentaries, describe a primordial egg emerging from chaos or the boundless void. From its center came Phanes, the firstborn of creation, radiant and multifaceted, who brought life, motion, and order to the universe. This imagery is more than poetic metaphor. It embodies a systematic attempt to explain the genesis of all things, a framework in which divinity, matter, and cosmic law are intertwined. Was this an allegory, a mystical insight, or a proto-philosophical model of cosmology? The answer remains tantalizingly out of reach. The Orphic mysteries were closely guarded. Initiates underwent rigorous instruction, often in secrecy, absorbing hymns, rituals, and symbolic knowledge that could not be fully captured in writing. The cosmic egg doctrine was central to this education, illustrating not only the origin of the universe, but also the principles governing life, death, and the soul's journey. In these teachings, the egg was both vessel and symbol, a container of infinite potential and a mirror for the inner world of the initiate. Could it be that the Orphics encoded sophisticated cosmological or ethical insight in symbolic form, preserving it from those unprepared to understand? Historical evidence provides glimpses, though frustratingly incomplete. Inscriptions on gold tablets discovered in burial sites, for example, reference phanes, light, and the cyclical nature of existence, hinting at a worldview where divine order and cosmic structure were inseparable. Philosophers such as Pythagoras, later Plato, and their followers may have drawn inspiration from these Orphic principles, integrating notions of unity, cyclical rebirth, and cosmic harmony into their own frameworks. But how closely these later systems reflect the original doctrine is uncertain. Were the Orphic hymns merely allegorical, or did they encode observational or experiential truths about the cosmos, transmitted orally with precision and care? The doctrine of the cosmic egg also intersects with speculative interpretations. Some researchers suggest that its structure hints at proto-scientific reasoning, an attempt to comprehend the origins of matter, light, and life, long before empirical methods existed. The egg's symmetry, balance, and internal radiance evoke a universe governed by principles rather than chaos, suggesting that early Greek mystics sought patterns underlying existence, even if expressed in symbolic or ritualized terms. Could these teachings reflect an intuitive grasp of cosmic cycles, the interrelation of forces, or the rhythms of life and death observable in nature? Yet the surviving fragments raise as many questions as they answer. Orphic hymns, poetic and cryptic, often describe sequences of emanation, birth, and return that challenge linear interpretation. How literal were these accounts meant to be? Did the initiates perceive them as metaphysical truths, allegorical instruction, or both simultaneously? And what practical role did this doctrine play in shaping social, spiritual, or moral conduct among Orphic adherents? Perhaps the cosmic egg served as both cosmological anchor and ethical compass, a framework in which understanding the universe was inseparable from understanding oneself. Archaeology offers additional, tantalizing evidence. Sites associated with Orphic worship contain votive offerings, inscriptions, and ritual spaces aligned with celestial markers. Some scholars propose that these alignments, combined with textual symbolism, formed a complex system of knowledge connecting the heavens, the earth, and the soul. If so, the cosmic egg doctrine may have represented more than myth, a multidimensional philosophy integrating observation, ritual practice, and ethical instruction into a cohesive worldview. The question remains, how much of this system has been irretrievably lost to time, leaving us with only glimpses of its original scope and sophistication? The philosophical implications are profound. In Orphic thought, the universe is not a random assemblage of matter, but a living, unified entity emerging from the egg's singular potential. Phanes, as firstborn, mediates the principles of light, life, and order, setting the framework for all subsequent existence. The image invites reflection. If the universe began as a singular, ordered whole, what does that imply about the nature of reality, the role of consciousness, and the moral and spiritual architecture of life? Could the doctrine hint at knowledge that transcends metaphor, touching on principles of unity and balance, observable both in nature and in human society? Walking through the ruins of early Greek sanctuaries today, one can almost sense the lingering aura of initiation. Stone altars, carved inscriptions, and shadowed groves bear witness to the devotion of those who sought understanding through ritual, symbol, and contemplation. The cosmic egg doctrine, though fragmented and obscured, embodies a vision of the cosmos as both orderly and mysterious, a reflection of the infinite potential contained in a singular, unified source. What the Orphic initiates perceived within that egg, truth, pattern, divine intention, or insight into the human soul, remains beyond full comprehension. And yet, the mystery persists. Was the Orphic cosmic egg doctrine primarily allegorical, a poetic illustration of divine order? Or did it contain systematic insights into the cosmos, encoded in symbols and ritual for initiates to decipher? How much of the original version has vanished, leaving only echoes in later texts, philosophical references, and archaeological hints? Could fragments of its knowledge survive in ways yet unrecognized, waiting for those attuned to decode its symbolism? In contemplating the Greek Orphic cosmic egg doctrine, we are invited to meditate on the origins of thought, the relationship between symbol and reality, and the ways humans have sought to understand the cosmos. What truths might have been contained within that radiant egg, and how much remains hidden beyond the veil of history, awaiting rediscovery? Perhaps the egg itself, as a symbol of unity and potential, continues to inspire reflection on the profound mysteries that have captivated the human mind for millennia, bridging the seen and unseen, the known and the unknowable. And as the Aegean whispers fade behind us, carrying the echoes of Orphic mysteries, our journey now follows the glint of distant horizons to the rugged coasts and bustling ports of the ancient Levant. Here, along the shores of what is today Lebanon and the surrounding regions of the Mediterranean, a seafaring people emerged whose mastery of the ocean was matched only by the enigma of their knowledge: the Phoenicians. Among their many achievements, one of the most intriguing is the elusive system often called the Maritime prophecy codes. Cryptic messages, rituals, and navigational secrets encoded to guide both voyage and destiny across the open sea. Imagine standing on a rocky promontory overlooking a crescent of turquoise water, the sun catching the sails of small cedar ships as they glide from port to port. The salt air is thick with possibility, and the endless horizon evokes both freedom and danger. It is along these waters that Phoenician mariners not only mapped currents and coastlines, but also developed a system of prophecy intertwined with navigation, a synthesis of observation, ritual, and coded knowledge that allowed them to traverse the Mediterranean and beyond with uncanny success. How did these ancient sailors combine the practical and the mystical to protect themselves from the unknown perils of the sea? The Phoenician maritime prophecy codes, as scholars infer from surviving inscriptions, ritual objects, and classical accounts, were multifaceted. Mariners carried with them symbols and tablets that recorded signs interpreted as warnings or guidance, correlated with celestial movements, seasonal shifts, and omens encountered during their voyages. Some codes were believed to predict storms, guide the timing of departures, or advise on the selection of routes. Others were moral or spiritual in nature, offering counsel on the behavior and decisions of the crew, the leadership of captains, and the fortunes of the voyage itself. Could it be that these codes represented an integrated system of knowledge, blending meteorology, astronomy, and spiritual insight long before formal scientific methods emerged? Physical evidence of these practices is rare but tantalizing. Archaeologists have uncovered small inscribed tablets, figurines, and ceremonial artifacts in ancient ports such as Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, often associated with offerings to deities of the sea. Inscriptions suggest that the Phoenicians placed immense trust in omens, auguries, and coded signs derived from both nature and ritual observation. While much remains undeciphered, these artifacts hint at a sophisticated framework where symbolic knowledge guided practical action, ensuring both the safety of the crew and the success of the mission. Could these maritime codes have functioned as both spiritual protection and a mnemonic system for navigational and strategic expertise? The structure of the codes is itself mysterious. Classical sources describe the Phoenicians as skilled astrologers and interpreters of natural phenomena, suggesting that their maritime codes were keyed to cycles of stars, lunar phases, and weather patterns. Certain symbols may have functioned as shorthand for predicting currents, recognizing seasonal winds, or anticipating hazards along coastlines. Some scholars speculate that these codes encoded not only practical guidance, but also moral or ethical instruction, directing mariners to act with integrity, courage, and prudence. In this sense, the codes were as much about cultivating the right mindset for navigating the unknown as they were about steering ships across the Mediterranean. The codification of maritime prophecy also points to a culture deeply aware of human vulnerability in the face of the natural world. Voyages were perilous, storms could appear without warning, currents could sweep vessels far off course, and unknown lands held both opportunity and threat. The Phoenicians, however, appear to have developed methods to anticipate and interpret these dangers, embedding their knowledge in symbolic and ritual frameworks that reinforced communal memory, discipline, and trust. Could the prophetic aspect of the codes have amplified the crew's situational awareness, transforming intuitive understanding into actionable insight, while also connecting their practical skills to a larger cosmological order? Speculative theories suggest that the codes may have included layered meanings accessible only to trained initiates. Some propose that they combined navigational charts with astrological patterns and moral directives, forming a system where observation, intuition, and ritual intersected. Others argue that the predictive nature of these codes was metaphorical, providing guidance for decision-making in uncertain conditions rather than literal foresight. Regardless, the deliberate secrecy surrounding them, passed through apprenticeship and guarded within merchant families or priestly classes, indicates that the Phoenicians regarded this knowledge as both powerful and dangerous if misused. Evidence also hints at broader applications of these codes beyond mere navigation. References in classical Greek and Roman texts describe Phoenician merchants as having uncanny foresight regarding trade winds, market cycles, and geopolitical shifts. Could the maritime prophecy codes have functioned as a holistic system of wisdom, integrating environmental observation, economic planning, and spiritual guidance into a single framework? The implications are profound. A civilization capable of crossing vast oceans with relative safety, guided not only by skill but by a codified system of cosmic and natural interpretation, centuries before modern navigation. The fragility of this knowledge compounds its allure. Phoenician cities endured invasions, conquest, and cultural assimilation, dispersing the original texts, symbols, and oral traditions. What remains are tantalizing fragments, references in later Greek and Roman works, isolated inscriptions, and archaeological remnants suggesting ritual observance and symbolic notation. How much of the system's depth has been lost, and what insights remain hidden within these scattered traces? Could modern scholars, with careful analysis, reconstruct even a partial picture of the code's content and function, or is their full meaning forever obscured by the passage of time? Walking along the ancient harbors of Tyre or Byblos today, one can almost imagine Phoenician mariners preparing for departure, priests invoking the gods of the sea, captains consulting cryptic symbols, and crews absorbing lessons encoded in ritual and prophecy. The salt-laden wind carries a sense of possibility and peril, a reminder that knowledge in the ancient world was inseparable from courage, observation, and respect for unseen forces. The maritime prophecy codes reflect a civilization attuned to both practical reality and metaphysical guidance, capable of navigating uncertainty with precision and reverence. And yet, the mystery endures. Were the Phoenician maritime prophecy codes primarily symbolic, moral, or predictive in nature? Did they encode practical navigational knowledge, spiritual insight, or an integrated system of both? How much was lost when centuries of conquest, cultural change, and environmental decay scattered the texts and artifacts? Could remnants of this wisdom survive unnoticed in inscriptions, oral traditions, or even in practices carried forward by successor cultures? In contemplating the Phoenician maritime prophecy codes, we are invited to ponder the ingenuity of a civilization that traversed vast seas guided by observation, intuition, and ritualized wisdom. What secrets of the ocean, of fate, and of human foresight might these codes have contained, and what remains hidden beneath the waves of history, waiting for those willing to look beyond the horizon, to read the signs left by those who sailed long before our time? And as the waves of the Mediterranean carry the whispers of Phoenician mariners into the Aegean, our journey shifts once more, this time to the rolling hills, fertile valleys, and rugged mountains of ancient Anatolia. Here, in what is now modern-day Turkey, temples once stood as portals between the earthly and the divine, their walls imbued with the echoes of ritual, meditation, and a practice that has all but vanished from human memory. The temple sleep, or incubation rituals, through which initiates sought visions, healing, and guidance directly from the gods. Picture a secluded Anatolian temple at dusk. Stone columns rising from the earth, cloaked in creeping ivy, the warm glow of oil lamps flickering against intricately carved reliefs, the air thick with the scent of incense and the distant murmur of chanting. Pilgrims and initiates recline within sacred chambers, laying themselves upon stone beds or mats, preparing to surrender to sleep as a conduit to the divine. In these moments of quiet and anticipation, the boundary between the material and the spiritual was said to dissolve, allowing dreams and visions to flow freely, carrying messages from the gods, ancestors, or unseen forces. What might these practitioners have perceived in the darkness, and how much of their experience has been lost to the sands of time? Historical references to temple sleep practices are scattered, often passing through later Greek and Roman accounts. Yet they point to a rich tradition deeply embedded in the spiritual life of Anatolia. Initiates sought guidance on health, fertility, conflict, and personal decisions, using sleep as a tool to unlock insight inaccessible to waking minds. The process was deliberate: ritual purification, fasting or abstention, and careful timing to align with celestial cycles or festival days. The aim was not mere slumber, but a controlled sacred immersion in the liminal space between consciousness and the divine. Could this practice represent one of the earliest attempts to harness the subconscious, blending spiritual aspiration with proto-psychological insight? Archaeological evidence provides tantalizing hints of these rituals. Excavations at temples in sites such as Hierapolis, Ephesus, and Phrygian sanctuaries reveal chambers that may have served as incubation rooms, niches in stone walls, specialized bedding platforms, and spaces designed to amplify sound or ritual focus. Reliefs and inscriptions occasionally depict figures reclining, while attendants or priests observe, perhaps guiding the sleep or interpreting the resulting visions. Some suggest that these rooms were intentionally engineered to enhance dream clarity, using architecture, acoustics, and ritual to shape the experience. How intentional were these designs, and what does it reveal about the ancients' understanding of perception, consciousness, and divine communication? The nature of the visions reported in temple sleep practices remains tantalizingly ambiguous. Accounts describe dreams of gods or mythic figures, encounters with spirits, and symbolic imagery carrying guidance, warning, or instruction. Were these experiences purely psychological, a result of expectation and ritual focus? Or did initiates genuinely perceive phenomena outside ordinary human understanding? Some scholars speculate that the combination of isolation, sensory input, and spiritual expectation could induce altered states of consciousness, while others point to the deeply spiritual context, emphasizing the interpretive role of priests and ritual guides in decoding the significance of the visions. The practice appears to have been both personal and communal. While initiates experienced visions individually, priests or temple authorities often acted as intermediaries, interpreting the messages for wider social or political use. Kings, citizens, and pilgrims may have sought guidance through these dreams for decisions as varied as agriculture, military strategy, or healing. Could this dual system, personal vision coupled with expert interpretation, represent an early form of structured divination, merging subjective experience with social oversight and embedding spiritual insight into the governance of the community? Speculative theories extend the mystery further. Some suggest that temple sleep may have incorporated mnemonic systems, symbolic cues, or even auditory and olfactory stimuli to enhance the depth and clarity of dreams. Others propose that the temples themselves were aligned with celestial or geomantic features, creating an environment in which natural and cosmic forces amplified visionary experiences. Was this a form of proto-scientific experimentation in consciousness, or purely a spiritual practice, or perhaps both? And how much of this knowledge was deliberately concealed, passed down only to the initiated, and deliberately lost as political, cultural, and religious upheavals transformed Anatolia over the centuries? The fragility of this knowledge only deepens the intrigue. Many temples fell into ruin due to earthquakes, invasions, and the relentless passage of time. Oral traditions were disrupted, inscriptions weathered away, and the precise methods of inducing, guiding, and interpreting sacred sleep faded from collective memory. Today, only fragments of inscriptions, architectural features, and sporadic descriptions in classical sources survive, tantalizing researchers and historians with the sense of a vast and sophisticated practice almost entirely vanished. What insights into human perception, spirituality, and healing might have been encoded in these rituals, now irretrievably lost? Walking among the ruins of Anatolian temples today, one can almost sense the lingering presence of ancient pilgrims and initiates. Stone platforms, echoing chambers, and quiet courtyards seem to whisper stories of dreams, visions, and divine encounters. The very air carries the memory of expectation and devotion, a testament to a time when sleep was not merely rest, but a sacred conduit, a bridge between human consciousness and forces beyond comprehension. How much of what was experienced and understood within these chambers has shaped subsequent spiritual and philosophical traditions, even if only indirectly? And yet, the mystery persists. Were the temple sleep practices primarily spiritual exercises, or did they encode practical wisdom about human cognition and perception? How much did initiates truly experience, and how much of their visions were interpreted, mediated, or guided by the priests? Could fragments of this knowledge survive in overlooked inscriptions, hidden chambers, or cultural memory waiting to be rediscovered? In contemplating the disappeared temple sleep practices of Anatolia, we are invited to reflect on the human desire to bridge the seen and unseen, to seek guidance and understanding through states of consciousness that transcend ordinary perception. What truths, long obscured by time and ruin, might have been revealed to those who dared to surrender themselves to the sacred sleep? And what remains hidden, waiting in the quiet stones and shadows of ancient temples to illuminate mysteries of mind, spirit, and the enduring human quest to touch the divine? And as the ancient temples of Anatolia fade behind us, their silent chambers still echoing with dreams and visions, our journey now returns to Mesopotamia, to the fertile plains along the Euphrates and Tigris, where the Babylonians once wove a tapestry of power, ritual, and mystery. Among these traditions, one of the most enigmatic and tightly guarded was the cult of the moon under King Nabonidus, whose devotion to the lunar deity Sin was unparalleled in recorded history. Within this cult, scholars and priests transmitted hidden teachings, arcane knowledge of celestial cycles, divine communication, and the alignment of earthly events with lunar rhythms, whose full scope remains lost to time. Picture the ziggurat of at night, its tiers rising into a starlit sky, the silver glow of the moon bathing the stone in ethereal light. Priests in flowing robes move silently along its terraces, their hands raised in invocation, their eyes tracing the subtle dance of shadows and light cast by the moon's reflection on the sacred water channels below. In these rituals, every movement, chant, and gesture is calibrated to the rhythms of the lunar cycles, aiming to attune both the participants and the state to forces beyond ordinary perception. What knowledge did these initiates receive in these sacred hours, and how did it shape their understanding of the cosmos, of kingship, and of the unseen threads binding heaven and earth? King Nabonidus himself is a figure of extraordinary fascination. Historical records suggest that his reign in the 6th century BC was marked by an unusual focus on the moon, diverging from the solar-centered worship of his contemporaries. He spent extended periods at the shrine of Sin in Haran, performing rituals and engaging with priests whose teachings were kept deliberately secret. The moon cult, it seems, was not only a religious practice but a system of governance and cosmic interpretation, wherein lunar phenomena were read as signs, omens, or directives for both personal and state action. Could it be that the hidden teachings encompassed mathematics, astronomy, and divination, encoded in symbolic rites intelligible only to the initiated? Archaeological evidence provides tantalizing glimpses. Tablets, inscriptions, and ceremonial objects associated with the moon god Sin indicate a highly sophisticated understanding of lunar cycles, eclipses, and celestial alignment. Certain texts describe the moon as a regulator of earthly events, agricultural cycles, political stability, and even personal fortune. Yet the full corpus of teachings, particularly those regarded as secret, is largely missing. Were these teachings encoded in symbols, rituals, or oral transmission, intentionally designed to resist decay over time, or did the passage of conquest and upheaval erase them completely? The rituals themselves were immersive and highly disciplined. Initiates reportedly engaged in fasting, meditation, and prolonged observation of the night sky, creating conditions in which both mind and body could attune to lunar rhythms. Dreams, visions, and subtle signs in nature were interpreted as messages from Sin, guiding decisions from personal conduct to matters of state. How much of these experiences were spiritual, and how much might reflect an intuitive understanding of astronomical patterns and seasonal cycles? The interplay between mystical insight and empirical observation remains one of the greatest enigmas of the Nabonidus moon cult. Speculative accounts suggest the teachings were layered. Some references hint at a system of correspondences, phases of the moon linked to particular deities, omens, or human behaviors. Others imply that the cult held a cosmology in which the moon served as both an instrument and a symbol of divine will, mediating between the human and celestial realms. Could these practices have functioned as an early form of predictive science, embedded within ritual and myth, providing insights into celestial and terrestrial cycles that were comprehensible only to the learned few? The secrecy surrounding the cult amplifies its mystery. Priests were said to interpret omens privately, revealing guidance only to those deemed worthy, including the king himself. Public knowledge of lunar worship existed, but the depth and method of the hidden teachings were jealously guarded. This raises enduring questions. Were the hidden teachings purely spiritual, intended to cultivate moral and ethical insight, Or did they encode practical knowledge about astronomy, seasonal cycles, and governance? Perhaps both, intertwined in ways that rendered them simultaneously mystical, symbolic, and actionable. The influence of these teachings may have extended far beyond ritual observance. Nabonidus's long absences from Babylon to devote himself to the moon suggest that lunar guidance influenced policy, military strategy, and religious reform. Could the hidden teachings have offered a structured understanding of cause and effect, linking celestial events to human affairs in a way that shaped political and social stability? And if so, how much of this knowledge was preserved after the fall of Babylon, and how much has been irrevocably lost to history? Archaeology provides subtle hints, but no definitive answers. Excavations of Harran and surrounding regions reveal ziggurats, altars, and ritual spaces aligned to lunar phases, alongside inscriptions invoking Sin in cryptic language. Some scholars argue that these alignments indicate a sophisticated grasp of astronomy and timekeeping, encoded within the religious practices of the cult. The possibility exists that the hidden teachings blended empirical observation with spiritual insight, offering initiates both mystical illumination and practical guidance. But the precise methods, symbols, and interpretive frameworks remain tantalizingly elusive. Walking among the ruins of Harran today, the moon still rises over the terraces once trodden by Nabonidus and his priests. Shadows stretch long over stone steps and altars, as if preserving a memory of voices reciting chants, of eyes turned skyward to trace cycles invisible to ordinary observers. The air is silent, yet one can almost feel the weight of knowledge once held within these walls, a wisdom at the intersection of ritual, observation, and cosmic order. What truths did the hidden teachings convey, and how deeply did they shape the minds and actions of those initiated into the cult? And yet, the mystery endures. Were the Nabonidus moon cult's hidden teachings primarily symbolic, designed to cultivate spiritual insight and ethical conduct? Or did they contain practical knowledge of lunar and celestial cycles, embedded within ritual to be accessible only to those trained to perceive them? How much has been lost to conquest, time, and secrecy, leaving only fragments of inscriptions, artifacts, and echoes in later texts? Could elements of this knowledge survive unnoticed, waiting to illuminate aspects of Mesopotamian understanding of the cosmos and human destiny? In contemplating the Nabonidus moon cult and its hidden teachings, we are invited to reflect on a civilization's attempt to harmonize human life with the rhythms of the heavens. What secrets of time, fate, and celestial influence might have been preserved in those sacred texts and rituals? And what remains hidden in the night sky and in the ruins of ancient ziggurats, waiting to reveal the wisdom of a king and his priests, who once sought to align the world with the cycles of the moon? As the silver light of Mesopotamian ziggurats fades behind us, and the lunar rituals of Nabonidus recede into memory, our exploration now leaps across oceans and continents to the lush, humid lowlands of Mesoamerica. Here, amid the dense jungles and winding rivers of what is now southern Mexico, an ancient civilization thrived whose influence echoes mysteriously through colossal stone heads, intricate jade carvings, and enigmatic iconography: the Olmecs. Among their most haunting and inscrutable legacies is the Were-Jaguar consciousness cult, a spiritual and psychological system that sought to merge human and jaguar essence, linking the animal's power and instincts with human perception, identity, and perhaps even altered states of awareness. Imagine the tropical canopy at dawn, mist rising from the labyrinth of rivers and undergrowth, sunlight filtering through the leaves in fractured beams. In this primeval world, Olmec priests and shamans moved silently among earthen mounds and ceremonial plazas, their bodies painted with pigments, their eyes alert to the interplay of shadow and light. On stone altars and in sacred chambers, figurines of hybrid human jaguar beings, Creatures with elongated foreheads, feline features, and penetrating gaze stand as witnesses to rituals now lost. What practices allowed initiates to embody this dual consciousness? And how did the Olmecs conceive of identity as fluid, capable of bridging human and animal realms? Archaeological evidence hints at a sophisticated system of spiritual and psychological cultivation. Colossal heads, some weighing several tons, depict both human and feline features with astonishing precision, suggesting reverence not merely for physical power but for symbolic and cognitive integration. Smaller jade figurines and ceremonial masks often present similar hybrid forms, interpreted by scholars as talismans or ritual implements designed to facilitate entry into altered states of perception. Could these images have served as focal points for meditation, ritual, or guided transformation, allowing initiates to inhabit a jaguar-like consciousness during sacred ceremonies? The Were-Jaguar cult appears to have been more than symbolic. Certain Olmec sites show evidence of ritualized spaces, perhaps designed to evoke sensory experiences conducive to trance or altered perception. Acoustically resonant chambers, enclosed plazas for chanting and drumming, and controlled exposure to natural light and shadow. Priests or shamanic guides may have led initiates through sequences of sound, movement, and visualization, cultivating a heightened awareness that merged instinct, intuition, and spiritual insight. How did this practice shape perception, cognition, and communal behavior within Olmec society? And to what extent did it reinforce social, political, or religious structures? Written records are absent, leaving interpretation to artifacts, iconography, and comparative anthropology. Yet the imagery consistently reflects themes of duality, transformation, and liminality, hallmarks of consciousness practices in diverse cultures. The Were-Jaguar figures are not merely decorative. They are encoded with meaning, representing a worldview in which human identity is permeable and the spiritual, animal, and natural realms are intertwined. Could these teachings have functioned as a system for understanding human potential, bridging conscious thought with instinctive knowledge and linking individual perception with collective ritual experience? Speculative theories extend the mystery further. Some suggest that the Olmecs employed psychoactive substances, fasting, or sensory manipulation to facilitate experiences of jaguar consciousness, creating visions in which human and feline faculties merged. Others propose that the cult was a method of training leaders and priests, instilling courage, strategic thinking, and empathy through identification with the jaguar, a top predator of the jungle. How literal or symbolic were these experiences? Did initiates genuinely perceive themselves as part jaguar, or were these practices metaphorical guides to mastery over fear, perception, and decision-making? The social dimension of the cult is equally compelling. Were-Jaguar imagery appears across civic, ceremonial, and funerary contexts, suggesting that the cult influenced both private spiritual practice and public life. Kings, elites, and shamans may have drawn authority from their association with this dual consciousness, signaling both spiritual power and a connection to the natural world. Did the Were-Jaguar cult encode a moral or ethical framework, guiding rulers in decision-making and communal responsibility, or was it primarily a spiritual and cognitive technology designed to cultivate perception and awareness in ritual contexts? Evidence also suggests continuity and diffusion of symbolism. Later Mesoamerican cultures, such as the Maya and Zapotecs, exhibit hybrid human-animal motifs and shamanic practices reminiscent of Olmec traditions. Could these echoes indicate the transmission of consciousness practices, preserved in altered forms across centuries, or do they reflect parallel developments in the human psyche and cultural imagination? And what does this reveal about the universality of human attempts to expand awareness, integrate instinct, and bridge the perceived gap between animal and human consciousness? The fragility of knowledge adds to the intrigue. Rainforests, river erosion, and centuries of human transformation have obliterated many Olmec sites, leaving only stone, jade, and traces of earthen mounds. Oral traditions, if they existed, were lost, and much of the practical methodology behind the Were-Jaguar cult remains inaccessible. Yet the remaining artifacts, imposing heads, hybrid figurines, ceremonial platforms, evoke a sense of intentionality and design that transcends mere art. They speak of a system in which spiritual, cognitive, and social elements were interwoven into a coherent and transformative practice. How much of this knowledge has vanished beyond recovery, and how much can still be inferred through careful study of what survives? Walking among the remnants of Olmec ceremonial centers today, one can almost sense the presence of initiates reclining in trance, guided by drumming, chanting, and vision. The hybrid faces carved in jade and basalt seem to watch, inviting reflection on the fluidity of identity, the potency of ritual, and the human desire to access forces beyond ordinary perception. The Were-Jaguar cult embodies a philosophy in which perception, instinct, and spirituality converge, a bridge between human consciousness and the animal world that challenges modern assumptions about cognition, selfhood, and the limits of understanding. And yet, the mystery endures. Were the Olmec Were-Jaguar practices primarily symbolic, designed to guide ethical and spiritual development, or did they constitute practical methods for altering perception and cognition? How much of their teaching was encoded in ritual, imagery, or social hierarchy, and how much has been lost to time, leaving only fragments to tease the imagination? Could remnants of this consciousness cult survive, hidden in the landscape, the artifacts, or even within the collective memory of later civilizations, waiting for discovery and interpretation? In contemplating the Olmec Were-Jaguar consciousness cult, we are invited to consider the extraordinary lengths to which humans have gone to understand themselves and the natural world. What truths about instinct, perception, and spiritual insight might the Olmecs have grasped through these practices, and what remains obscured, lurking in shadowed temples, carved stone, and the dense jungles that once bore witness to one of humanity's most enigmatic and transformative cults? As the dense jungles of Olmec lands recede behind us, the whisper of ancient drums fades into a distant echo. We turn our gaze southward over mountain ranges that pierce the sky and valleys carved by glacial rivers to the highlands of the Andes. Here, amid the jagged peaks and terraced slopes, a civilization flourished whose mysteries still resonate through stone citadels, agricultural terraces, and sacred pathways. The people who revered Viracocha, the creator, and practiced what scholars have come to call the Andean Viracocha memory tradition, a complex system of knowledge, oral history, and spiritual consciousness designed to preserve the past, shape the present, and guide the future. Imagine standing atop a sun-drenched ridge overlooking a valley where mist clings to the slopes, sunlight glinting off intricately cut stones of ceremonial platforms and stairways. In the distance, the ruins of ancient settlements punctuate the landscape, their walls echoing the footsteps of priests, elders, and messengers who carried knowledge across generations. Within this environment, the Viracocha memory tradition emerged, blending ritual, mnemonic devices, and storytelling into a coherent framework that allowed Andean peoples to retain and transmit complex historical, astronomical, and spiritual knowledge without the aid of written scripts. How did these people encode generations of wisdom into stories, songs, and ritual, and how accurate could such a system remain over centuries? Central to the tradition was the reverence for Viracocha, the creator and architect of the world, whose presence was felt in the mountains, rivers, and celestial patterns. Initiates and elders performed ceremonies at specific times of the year, aligning rituals with the movement of the sun, moon, and stars. These performances were not merely devotional. They served as living libraries, encoding cosmological principles, moral guidance, agricultural knowledge, and historical events into performances that could be memorized and transmitted across communities. Could it be that the Andean peoples had developed an oral system rivaling written records, preserving both practical and metaphysical understanding in a form accessible only to the initiated? The tools of this memory tradition were multifaceted. Quipus, bundles of knotted cords, remain the most enigmatic evidence of the system, their knots and colors interpreted by some scholars as numerical records, calendars, or even narrative devices. Alongside Quipus, songs, chants, and ritual dances acted as mnemonic anchors, embedding sequences of events, genealogies, and cosmological maps into performative practice. The Andes themselves, with their dramatic topography and sacred sites, were part of the memory landscape, offering natural markers that linked stories to specific locations, turning the land into a living map of collective knowledge. How were these mnemonic landscapes coordinated across vast distances, ensuring that memory and tradition remained consistent even amid isolated communities? The Viracocha memory tradition extended beyond the merely practical. It shaped perception, ethics, and social cohesion. Initiates learned to recognize patterns in weather, river flow, and celestial cycles, connecting these observations with moral and spiritual teachings. By harmonizing human action with the rhythms of nature, the tradition fostered a sense of responsibility, foresight, and alignment with forces greater than the individual. Could these practices represent one of humanity's earliest attempts to codify ecological and cosmological awareness within ritualized memory, integrating observation, ethics, and spirituality into a single framework? Speculative interpretations deepen the mystery. Some researchers propose that Quipus, combined with ceremonial observances, encoded multi-layered meanings, intertwining numerical, historical, and spiritual data into a synesthetic system only fully interpretable by trained elders. Others suggest that the memory tradition included guided visionary experiences, where ritual, isolation, and sensory focus allowed participants to access ancestral knowledge or cosmic patterns in ways that transcended ordinary consciousness. Were these visions literal insights into the past, or symbolic reflections designed to cultivate wisdom, intuition, and communal cohesion? The social dimension of the tradition is equally profound. Knowledge was not democratized. It was carefully transmitted through initiation and mentorship, ensuring both continuity and the integrity of interpretation. Elders acted as both custodians and interpreters, guiding communities through festivals, agricultural cycles, and political decisions based on the encoded wisdom of Viracocha. Could this system of controlled transmission have functioned as both spiritual guidance and a mechanism of governance, embedding societal norms and cosmic understanding into the rhythms of daily life? Despite the sophistication of the tradition, much remains elusive. The arrival of European conquerors, disease, and cultural upheaval disrupted the continuity of memory systems, scattering Quipus, oral texts, and ritual knowledge. What insights into human cognition, ecological awareness, and spiritual perception have been lost, irretrievable across centuries of displacement and destruction? Could elements of the Viracocha memory tradition have survived in later Andean practices, subtly shaping ritual, folklore, and social structures without explicit recognition of their original context? Archaeological traces offer tantalizing glimpses. Sites such as Tiwanaku, Chavin, and later Inca ceremonial centers contain architectural alignments, ceremonial plazas, and iconography that suggest the deliberate integration of landscape, celestial observation, and ritual memory. Quipus, carefully stored in temples or ceremonial centers, hint at codified knowledge yet to be fully deciphered. How did these mnemonic systems interact with the physical and spiritual environment? and what cognitive and cultural strategies allowed knowledge to persist without written text. Walking through the ruins today, one can almost sense the rhythm of ancient ceremonies, the measured steps of initiates, the cadence of chants, the patterns of shadow and light on stone terraces. The Andes themselves seem alive with encoded memory, a landscape where mountains, rivers, and sky act as both stage and script for the transmission of knowledge. What did the participants perceive in these rituals, and how did their understanding of the cosmos, time, and social order shape the civilizations they built? And yet, the mystery endures. How complete was the Viracocha memory tradition, and what remains hidden within the quipus, the rituals, and the landscapes themselves? Did the tradition encompass practical, historical, and spiritual knowledge as a single, integrated system? Could surviving fragments illuminate aspects of human memory, cognition, and cultural preservation that remain unparalleled even today? In contemplating the Andean Viracocha memory tradition, we are invited to ponder a civilization that wove history, spirituality, and observation into the very fabric of landscape and society. What secrets about perception, cosmic alignment, and the continuity of knowledge might still lie hidden among the terraces, shrines, and knotted cords of the Andes, waiting for those willing to read the signs left by a people who sought to preserve the wisdom of the ages within memory itself? As the mist of the Andean highlands recedes from our senses, and the echoes of the Viracocha memory tradition fade into the wind, our journey now takes us across vast steppes and rolling plains to the lands once roamed by the Scythians, nomadic horsemen whose influence stretched from the northern shores of the Black Sea deep into Central Asia. Here, amid grasslands that stretch to the horizon and rivers that carve silver veins through the earth, an extraordinary and enigmatic spiritual practice flourished: the Scythian soul flight, a shamanic tradition in which selected individuals sought to leave the confines of the body and traverse unseen realms, moving between the material world, the spirit world, and the cosmos itself. Picture the wide open steppe at dawn. Mist hovers over dew-soaked grass, the chill of early morning pressing against the skin. Scythian shamans, cloaked in furs and adorned with symbolic ornaments, kneel beside smoldering fires, the smoke curling into the cold air. Around them lie ritual objects, carved staves, animal masks, and ceremonial cups, each etched with images of animals, serpents, and celestial symbols. These were not mere decorations. They were conduits, tools designed to facilitate journeys of the soul and to invoke protection, guidance, and insight from realms beyond ordinary perception. How did these shamans perceive the boundaries between self and universe, and what techniques allowed them to traverse them safely? Historical records, sparse and filtered through the observations of Greek historians and later chroniclers, hint at elaborate shamanic rituals. Participants reportedly entered trance states through rhythmic drumming, controlled breathing, ingestion of plant substances, and prolonged meditation. The purpose was both spiritual and practical. Shamans would journey in spirit to gather knowledge, foresee threats, heal the sick, and maintain the cohesion of the tribe. Could these soul flights have been perceived as literal journeys into otherworldly realms, or were they sophisticated practices of psychological exploration, enhancing intuition and cognitive perception? Archaeological evidence offers tantalizing glimpses into the complexity of these rituals. Burial mounds, kurgans, reveal not only wealth and status, but also carefully arranged ritual spaces containing the remains of shamans, ceremonial horses, and symbolic artifacts. Some objects suggest a focus on animal spirit guides, stags, wolves, and birds, implying that the soul flights may have been guided or protected by these forces. Did the Scythians believe that their consciousness could assume animal forms, bridging instinct and intellect, mortality and the eternal? How might this belief have shaped their interactions with the natural world, their understanding of death, and their strategies for survival? The practice of soul flight was not merely personal. It had profound social and political dimensions. Shamans acted as mediators between the spiritual and temporal realms, advising leaders, resolving conflicts, and maintaining the spiritual well-being of the community. Their journeys were believed to uncover hidden truths, foresee dangers, and communicate with ancestral or divine spirits. Could the cognitive and experiential insights gained in these altered states have influenced military strategy, trade decisions, or governance? How did the communal belief in soul flight reinforce social cohesion and the authority of the shaman within Scythian society? Speculative theories add layers of intrigue. Some scholars suggest that Scythian shamans may have employed entheogenic plants or psychotropic substances to facilitate their journeys, while others propose that extreme isolation, fasting, or ritualized movement induced profound, altered states of consciousness. There is evidence that visual and auditory stimuli, fires, drum beats, animal masks, were deliberately structured to create immersive experiences, aligning body, mind, and environment in ways that might have allowed the soul to travel. Were these journeys experienced as visions, spiritual realities, or both? And how did they shape the shaman's understanding of life, death, and cosmic order? Art and iconography support the mystery further. Gold plaques, carvings, and textiles frequently depict hybrid beings, half human, half animal, interacting with celestial symbols, serpents, and birds in flight. Could these images represent the perceived forms assumed during soul flights, or are they symbolic maps of the spiritual journeys undertaken by the initiated? The consistency of these motifs across Scythian sites suggests a coherent system of thought, linking cosmology, ritual practice, and social structure in ways that remain tantalizingly elusive to modern researchers. The fragility of historical memory compounds the enigma. The Scythians left no written records of their own, and Greek observers recorded their interpretations through cultural lenses often hostile or exoticizing. Much of the practical knowledge of the soul flight, its techniques, stages, and cosmological frameworks, has vanished. Yet the surviving artifacts, kurgans, and iconography evoke an intentional design, suggesting that the practice was both widespread and carefully structured. Could echoes of this tradition survive in later shamanic practices across Eurasia, or in folk memory encoded in myth and legend, waiting to be recognized by those who study the depths of human consciousness? Walking across these wind-swept steppes today, one can almost feel the pulse of unseen journeys. The grasses sway in patterns that seem to echo the movements of unseen spirits. The sky stretches endlessly, and the horizon blurs into the infinite. It is easy to imagine shamans in trance, rising above their bodies, guided by animal spirits and celestial rhythms, moving between worlds with purpose and precision. What did they see? What truths did they uncover? And how did their journeys shape not only their lives, but the collective wisdom of the Scythian peoples? And yet, much remains unknown. Were the Scythian soul flights primarily spiritual explorations, or did they encode practical knowledge of the environment, strategy, and social dynamics? How did shamans train, transmit, and preserve this knowledge without written records? What aspects of human consciousness did they access that modern science still struggles to understand? And what might remain hidden, buried beneath kurgans, encoded in gold ornaments, or lingering in the stories of distant descendants? In contemplating the Scythian soul flight shamanic practice, we are confronted with the profound complexity of human attempts to transcend ordinary perception. What insights into the self, the cosmos, and the unseen forces of life might these ancient shamans have attained, and how much of their wisdom remains obscured, awaiting discovery in the windswept plains, ritual mounds, and shadowed artifacts of a people who sought to touch the infinite while grounded in the mortal world? As the endless Eurasian steppes fade from view, leaving behind the whispers of Scythian shamans and their soul flights, we journey once more across oceans and forests to the dense, humid lowlands of Mesoamerica, to a civilization whose mysteries remain both rich and perilous: the Maya. Beneath the canopy of towering ceiba trees and the ceaseless calls of tropical birds lie the remnants of cities, plazas, and ceremonial complexes that once thrummed with the rhythm of sacred time. Among the most enigmatic of their practices are the underworld initiation paths, ritual journeys into realms of darkness and transformation, hidden both in caves and symbolic landscapes known only to the initiated. Picture the entrance to a deep, narrow cave where cool, damp air rises from shadowed chambers. Water trickles over smooth stone, echoing like a voice from another world. Here, the Maya initiated their most profound rites, descending into darkness that mirrors both the physical and spiritual worlds. Participants, guided by priests or shamans, may have crawled, waded, or climbed through passages carefully chosen for their symbolic resonance. What did these initiates see as they ventured deeper into the underworld? Were the challenges they faced literal tests of courage, or metaphors for the journey of the soul into hidden dimensions of perception and understanding? Historical and archaeological evidence provides glimpses, yet the picture remains incomplete. Maya codices, iconography, and carved stelae suggest a sophisticated cosmology in which the underworld, Xibalba, was not merely a place of death but a realm of transformation, a mirror of the heavens, and a crucible for spiritual and personal evolution. Certain caves, long revered as sacred spaces, bear traces of offerings, ceramics, obsidian blades, and carved figurines. Could these objects have been talismans, intended to guide and protect the initiate as they confronted the unknown, or were they symbolic markers encoding myths, cosmology, and memory? The underworld initiation paths appear to have combined sensory, cognitive, and spiritual challenges. Darkness, confined spaces, and the echo of dripping water may have induced altered states of perception. Ritual chants, firelight flickering on jagged walls, and the scent of incense or aromatic plants would have engaged the senses fully, heightening focus and dissolving ordinary boundaries of consciousness. How did these experiences shape the participants' sense of self, their understanding of mortality, and their connection to the cosmic order as defined by Maya cosmology? Maya iconography reinforces the complexity of these paths. Depictions of jaguars, bats, serpents, and skeletal figures suggest the presence of spirit guides or tests of courage and insight. Many murals and carvings indicate duality: life and death, darkness and light, human and divine. Could initiates have been trained to navigate these dualities, integrating fear, courage, and wisdom into a conscious understanding of existence and the cycles of time? How literal were these depictions, and how much of their meaning remains encoded in symbolic form, waiting for careful interpretation? Speculative interpretations deepen the intrigue. Some scholars suggest that the initiates may have consumed hallucinogenic plants or engaged in fasting and sensory deprivation, intensifying their experience of the underworld. Others propose that the paths were designed to synchronize with astronomical and calendrical events, linking the individual's spiritual journey with cosmic cycles. Could the Maya have created a system in which personal transformation, communal ritual, and celestial observation were inseparably intertwined, each informing and reinforcing the other? The social and spiritual dimensions were inseparable. Initiates, once transformed, became conduits for sacred knowledge, advisors to leaders, or ritual specialists. Their experience within the underworld would have informed both personal insight and communal practice, embedding the wisdom of the journey into social, political, and spiritual frameworks. How did these experiences influence decision-making, diplomacy, or ritual timing? And what role did the secrecy of these paths play in maintaining their power and efficacy? The Maya underworld rites were not merely internal or symbolic. The physical landscape, caves, cenotes, and subterranean rivers, was woven into ritual practice. Topography became text, a living, experiential manuscript in which the initiate could read the lessons of earth, water, and shadow. Could these journeys also have preserved ecological, astronomical, and hydrological knowledge in symbolic form, passed across generations through ritual rather than written language? Despite centuries of scholarship, the full understanding of these practices remains tantalizingly out of reach. Many caves have collapsed, been looted, or remain inaccessible. Oral transmission, often the only medium for esoteric knowledge, has been fragmented or lost entirely. What truths about human cognition, courage, and spiritual perception were encoded in these underworld paths that modern science may still struggle to interpret? How did Maya shamans and priests ensure fidelity of knowledge across generations without relying on written scripts? Walking among the ruins today, one can feel the weight of those who descended before. The stone steps, water-carved passages, and shadowed alcoves evoke not only architectural mastery but also psychological and spiritual design. The caves seem to breathe, whispering secrets of thresholds crossed, trials endured, and transformation achieved. What did initiates perceive within these sacred spaces? What truths of existence, mortality, and cosmic harmony did they glimpse, and how did the experience alter both their inner life and their society? And yet, the mystery endures. Were these initiation paths primarily spiritual trials, or did they serve practical and social functions as well, encoding knowledge essential for survival and governance? How complete was the understanding transmitted, and how much has been lost to time and secrecy? Could the paths themselves, along with the caves and sacred landscapes, contain hidden clues yet to be deciphered, waiting for those who can read their subtle language of shadow, water, and stone? In contemplating the unknown Maya underworld initiation paths, we are invited to imagine a civilization in which the threshold between life and death, self and cosmos, fear and wisdom, was traversed deliberately and with care. What hidden dimensions of consciousness, insight, and sacred knowledge might still linger within these subterranean passages, waiting for discovery, reflection, and understanding by those willing to walk in the footsteps of the initiated, guided by courage, perception, and reverence for the unseen? As the shadows of the Maya underworld recede and the echoes of subterranean chants fade from memory, we ascend once more into the sun-drenched plazas and towering pyramids of Mesoamerica, where time itself was carefully measured, observed, and sometimes reset. Here, in the heart of ancient cities such as Tikal, Copan, and Palenque, a sophisticated understanding of cycles, astronomical, agricultural, and spiritual, shaped both ritual and governance. Among the most enigmatic of these practices is the forgotten calendar reset, a phenomenon recorded in fragments of stelae, codices, and oral traditions, whose purpose, timing, and consequences remain shrouded in mystery. Picture standing atop a broad stone platform at dawn. The air is cool and fragrant with tropical flora, while shafts of light illuminate carved glyphs, each one a marker of time and celestial alignment. Maya priests, adorned in feathered headdresses and ceremonial robes, would gather to observe the rising sun, noting its position against distant mountains and temples. The calendar, composed of intricate cycles such as the Tzolk'in, Hab, and the Long Count, governed not only agriculture and commerce, but also the rhythm of spiritual life. How did these people perceive the flow of time so precisely, and what compelled them to intervene in its course, resetting it deliberately? Historical records suggest that the calendar reset was not an arbitrary event, but a profound act of cosmological realignment. Certain dates marked the completion of long cycles, times when the heavens, the earth, and human society were believed to be in alignment with cosmic forces. At these junctures, priests may have performed complex rituals to renew the relationship between the physical and spiritual worlds, to avert cosmic imbalance, or to initiate social and political renewal. Could these resets have been designed to harmonize human activity with celestial patterns, to restore equilibrium in a universe perceived as cyclical and alive? Archaeological evidence lends tantalizing hints, but few certainties. Monumental inscriptions, such as those at Were-Jaguar and Copan, record dates that suggest deliberate adjustments, sometimes accompanied by depictions of deities, sacrificial offerings, and celestial symbols. Certain codices reference events described as completions or renewals, though the precise meaning remains contested. Were these texts documenting literal astronomical corrections, spiritual acts of purification, or both simultaneously? How much of this knowledge was encoded for the initiated, and how much was meant to guide the broader populace in alignment with cosmic cycles? The mechanisms of the reset are as mysterious as their purpose. Maya priests may have synchronized ritual acts with solstices, equinoxes, and planetary movements, incorporating observation, ceremony, and community participation. Symbolic sacrifices, processions, and chants could have acted as both spiritual and mnemonic instruments, ensuring that knowledge of the cycles and their renewal was transmitted across generations. Could these practices represent an advanced integration of astronomy, ritual, and collective consciousness, a system in which the perception of time itself was actively shaped rather than passively observed? Speculative theories deepen the enigma. Some scholars propose that the calendar resets were linked to rare astronomical phenomena, alignments of Venus, eclipses, or planetary conjunctions, whose significance transcended mere observation, touching on prophecy and cosmic influence. Others suggest that resets were a form of social engineering, reasserting political power, or harmonizing diverse city-states through shared ritual observances. Could the combination of cosmic, political, and spiritual factors have created a system so sophisticated that even minor errors could provoke ritual intervention to restore balance? The social and spiritual dimensions of the resets are equally compelling. Priests and rulers acted as mediators, interpreting signs from the heavens and enacting ceremonies that reaffirmed the social order, agricultural cycles, and moral codes. The calendar was not only a record of days, but a living guide for communal and personal conduct. How did ordinary citizens perceive these events? Were they witnesses to the manipulation of cosmic time, or participants in a deeper understanding of cyclical reality that shaped daily life and worldview? Iconography and architecture offer further clues. Temples and pyramids were often aligned with solar and lunar paths, suggesting that the landscape itself acted as a physical calendar, marking important transitions. Carved glyphs depict serpents, jaguars, and deities associated with time, death, and rebirth. Could the very act of entering a temple, ascending a pyramid, or observing a sacred site have functioned as both ritual and mnemonic device, encoding the calendar's cycles and resets into lived experience? Despite centuries of study, the forgotten calendar reset remains elusive. Many codices were destroyed, oral traditions fragmented, and the meaning of inscriptions obscured by time. What knowledge about cycles, cosmic influence, and human perception of temporality has been lost, and how much might still survive in architecture, iconography, or ritual echoes among descendants of the Maya? Could the resets have encoded principles of human cognition and collective awareness that we are only beginning to glimpse through archaeology and ethnoastronomy? Standing today on these sacred platforms, it is easy to feel the pulse of a civilization attuned to the universe, sensing the movement of stars and planets, interpreting celestial rhythms and intervening in time itself. The stones, glyphs, and alignments whisper of deliberate acts to harmonize human life with cosmic order. What visions did the Maya priests perceive as they enacted these resets? How did their understanding of time shape their society, spirituality, and survival? And yet, much remains unanswered. Was the calendar reset primarily a spiritual act, a practical realignment, or an integrated fusion of both? How were such intricate systems taught, transmitted, and preserved across generations without the widespread use of written text? What remains hidden in the ruins, the glyphs, and the astronomical alignments that might reveal deeper truths about the Maya conception of time, cosmos, and human responsibility within the universe? In contemplating the forgotten calendar reset of ancient Mesoamerica, we are invited to witness a civilization whose mastery of cycles, ritual, and observation allowed humans to interact with the flow of time itself. What might these practices reveal about the human capacity to perceive, measure, and even reset the currents of existence, and how much of this profound understanding remains concealed, waiting for discovery among the stones, glyphs, and shadows of the ancient world? As the echoes of Mesoamerican timekeeping and sacred resets fade into memory, we return to the timeless sands and monumental temples of ancient Egypt, where the Nile carved life and mystery into the very soil. Among the most profound and enigmatic practices of this civilization is the ritual known as the opening of the mouth. To the untrained eye, it might appear as a funerary ceremony, performed on statues or mummified bodies to restore the senses and abilities of the deceased. Yet beneath its ceremonial surface lies a deeply psychological and spiritual dimension, one that speaks to the Egyptian understanding of consciousness, identity, and the delicate boundary between life and death. Imagine entering a dimly lit tomb or temple chamber. The air is cool, heavy with incense, and shadows flicker across hieroglyphs and painted reliefs. Priests, robed in linen and adorned with sacred amulets, hold ritual implements carefully carved from wood and stone. A statue or mummy lies upon a stone platform, its form meticulously prepared. The ritual begins with precise movements, gestures, and utterances. Every touch, every recitation is thought to awaken not merely the physical senses of the deceased, but the inner faculties of awareness itself. Could this ceremony have been understood as a psychological bridge between the worlds of the living and the dead, a means of preserving and transferring consciousness across existential thresholds? The historical record provides fragments recorded in tomb inscriptions, temple reliefs, and papyri. These texts describe the ritual as opening the mouth, eyes, ears, and other faculties, allowing the deceased to eat, speak, see, and hear in the afterlife. Yet the ritual's implications may extend far beyond a symbolic preparation for the next world. Could the Egyptians have intuited that consciousness, identity, and memory are not solely bound to the living body, but are in some way preserved, transmitted, or activated through ritualized action, intention, and psychological focus? The psychological dimension of the opening of the mouth is reinforced by the meticulous attention to sensory detail. Implements are touched to the lips, eyes, and ears. Gestures are repeated with exact precision, and invocations are spoken with cadence and resonance. In this careful orchestration, the ritual functions almost as a form of cognitive programming, awakening faculties that are latent, bridging the gap between physical death and ongoing spiritual agency. Did the priests perceive the mind and soul as malleable, capable of transformation through structured action, sound, and symbolic interaction? How might these techniques have influenced the living, those performing and witnessing the rites? as much as the deceased themselves. Archaeological evidence adds further layers of intrigue. Tools used in the ritual, ranging from ritual adzes and knives to ceremonial wands, are often inscribed with protective symbols or divine names. Statues and mummies show signs of careful manipulation, indicating a profound understanding of human anatomy, symbolism, and the interplay between ritual and psychology. Could these manipulations have acted as focal points for consciousness, encoding intention into material form? And if so, what does this suggest about the Egyptian conception of the mind, soul, and the unseen currents connecting the living and the dead? Speculative interpretations deepen the mystery. Some scholars argue that the ritual served to align the deceased with cosmic rhythms, restoring balance and vitality in accordance with celestial order. Others propose that the opening of the mouth may have functioned as a meditative or transformative practice, not solely for the dead, but for the priests themselves, whose focus, discipline, and intent may have allowed them to access altered states of consciousness. Could the ceremony, in essence, have been a psychological as well as spiritual tool, designed to facilitate connection with forces beyond ordinary perception, shaping cognition and awareness in subtle yet profound ways? The ritual also illuminates the social and spiritual hierarchy of ancient Egypt. Priests held unique roles as intermediaries between the divine, the living, and the dead. The opening of the mouth ritual was an act of authority and responsibility, embedding the priest within the continuum of cosmic order. How did this practice reinforce social cohesion, transmit esoteric knowledge, and provide continuity in understanding the mysteries of life and death? And what might it reveal about the Egyptian belief in the power of structured action, intention, and observation to shape not just spiritual outcomes, but collective consciousness? Iconography and temple reliefs offer tantalizing glimpses. Figures of gods and spirits surround the ritual scene, their gestures and gazes emphasizing the sacred coordination between human action and divine response. In some depictions, the deceased themselves appear animated, their eyes wide and lips parted, suggesting awakening or interaction. Could these images reflect an experiential understanding of consciousness as dynamic, participatory, and responsive to ritual and symbolism? How did the Egyptians conceptualize the transfer or reactivation of faculties across the boundary of death? And what can these images teach us about their cognitive and spiritual models? Even the linguistic structure of the ritual provides clues. Hieroglyphic texts are often layered, combining phonetic, symbolic, and semantic elements that simultaneously convey practical instruction, cosmic alignment, and psychological influence. Were these inscriptions intended to guide the ritual precisely, or did they function as an additional layer of activation, encoding intent and consciousness into words and symbols themselves? And if so, what does this reveal about the sophistication of Egyptian ritual thought and their understanding of how human perception and cognition might be extended through symbolic interaction? Despite centuries of study, many questions remain unanswered. The precise methods, timing, and cognitive effects of the opening of the mouth ritual remain partially obscured by time, lost texts, and cultural discontinuity. How deeply did the ritual shape the consciousness of participants, both living and dead? Could modern psychology or neuroscience provide insights into the efficacy of such practices? Or are they ultimately bound to a worldview that integrates life, death, cosmos, and consciousness in ways radically different from our own? Walking through the shadowed tombs today, one can almost feel the hum of unseen life. The walls seem to hold echoes of recited invocations, the faint motion of ritual implements, and the delicate attention paid to each sensory awakening. It is easy to imagine the priest's focused mind, the intent to bridge worlds, the hope and care invested in restoring faculties across the veil of mortality. What did they perceive in these moments of intimate ritual interaction? Did the act itself alter consciousness, awaken latent perception, or maintain a continuity between the physical and spiritual self that we are only beginning to comprehend? And yet, much remains hidden. Was the opening of the mouth primarily a funerary convenience, a social and religious codification, or an intentional psychological tool to awaken the mind, memory, and soul? How complete was the understanding encoded in these rituals, and how much has been lost, hidden in tombs, inscriptions, and the lingering echoes of priestly tradition? Could the very structure, timing, and sequence of gestures contain cognitive insights that remain unrecognized by modern scholarship, offering a bridge to the understanding of consciousness as conceived by the Egyptians? In contemplating the Egyptian opening of the mouth ritual, we are invited to witness a civilization in which the boundaries between body, mind, soul, and cosmos were carefully negotiated and activated through structured action, intention, and perception. What subtle truths about consciousness, transformation, and spiritual agency might have been preserved in this ritual, and how much of its mystery remains concealed within the silent chambers, sacred implements, and timeless hieroglyphs of Egypt, awaiting discovery by those willing to listen, observe, and reflect on the interface between the human and the divine. As the echoes of the Egyptian opening of the mouth ritual fade, our journey carries us across the azure waters of the Aegean Sea to the rocky, sun-scorched island of Rhodes. Here, in the shadow of cliffs and the rhythmic crash of waves against hidden coves, lies the legendary domain of the Telchinese, a people whose name appears in fleeting mentions among Greek mythographers, yet whose true knowledge remains largely veiled in mystery. Reputed as master metallurgists, sorcerers, and priests, the Telchines are said to have possessed secrets that blurred the line between craftsmanship, alchemy, and divine insight. What exactly did they know, and how did their teachings shape both mortal and divine spheres in ways that have left only whispers behind? Imagine a secluded valley on Rhodes, where windswept stones gleam under the Mediterranean sun and the scent of salt and thyme fills the air. In these hidden enclaves, the Telchinese may have worked metals with uncanny skill, forging tools, weapons, and sacred objects that seem to hold an almost otherworldly power. Legends claim they crafted tridents for Poseidon, imbued with forces both natural and mystical. Could these creations have been more than physical objects, perhaps repositories of knowledge, memory, or spiritual energy? How did the Telchines conceptualize the transformation of raw materials into instruments of cosmic significance? Historical and mythological accounts provide tantalizing yet fragmentary insights. Some describe the Telchinese as teachers, imparting esoteric knowledge to gods and mortals alike. Others portray them as malevolent, punished by divine forces for their hubris. Were these divergent accounts merely reflections of cultural fears and biases, or do they hint at the dual nature of their work, both creative and dangerous, spiritual and material? Could it be that their teachings encompassed principles of transformation, of matter, mind, and perhaps even reality itself, encoded in a manner now indecipherable to us? Archaeology offers glimpses, though far from definitive answers. Rhodes and its surrounding islets have yielded remnants of early metallurgy and unique artistic forms, suggesting advanced technical skill. The Telchinese, associated in some accounts with these innovations, may have developed methods that combined observation, experimentation, and ritual. Could their practices represent an integrated system in which practical skill and spiritual insight were inseparable, each informing the other in ways that modern distinctions between science and magic fail to capture? The psychological dimension of the Telchine teachings is equally compelling. Myths suggest that their knowledge included the manipulation of perception, enchantments, and perhaps the very shaping of human thought. Did they understand, in their own way, the power of symbols, gestures, and materials to influence consciousness? Could their rituals and craftsmanship have been exercises in focus, intention, and transformation, designed to extend the boundaries of perception and connect practitioners with forces beyond ordinary experience? Speculative interpretations deepen the enigma. Some propose that the Telchines were early practitioners of proto-alchemy, discovering methods to transform base metals, water, and earth into objects of potency or even consciousness. Others suggest that their knowledge of celestial and seasonal cycles informed both ritual and material practice, linking metallurgy, agriculture, and spiritual observance into a coherent system of cosmic attunement. How did they encode this knowledge, and why has so little survived? Was it deliberately obscured, transmitted orally, or hidden in symbols and objects whose meanings have been lost? The social and cultural dimensions of the Telchines' work are equally intriguing. As intermediaries between gods and mortals, their influence may have extended beyond metallurgy or magic, shaping religious practice, governance, and societal understanding of cosmic order. How were these teachings transmitted, and how were they regarded by contemporaries? Did their combination of practical skill, mystical knowledge, and spiritual authority make them revered, feared, or both? And how did the narratives that survive reflect attempts to control or reinterpret knowledge that was once considered dangerous or divine? Iconography and myth suggest a duality in their nature. Some portray them as benevolent artisans, shaping the tools and weapons of gods. Others depict them as chaotic or malevolent figures, capable of curses and destruction. Could these portrayals reflect a nuanced understanding of power, responsibility, and ethical consequences, encoded in myth to preserve lessons that might otherwise have been lost? And if their knowledge was indeed encoded in symbolic, practical, and ritual forms, how might those forms still be read by archaeologists, historians, or even by modern practitioners of esoteric craft? The psychological and spiritual aspects of their practices likely intersected with their material work. Metallurgy, in the hands of the Telchines, may have functioned as meditation, ritual, and instruction simultaneously. The transformation of raw ore into a polished object could mirror internal processes, focus, intention, and disciplined action, producing subtle changes in perception, understanding, and spiritual alignment. Could the very act of creation have been a form of teaching, transmitting insight from the Telchines to initiates through the tangible language of form, texture, and resonance? Despite centuries of study, the Telchines remain shrouded in obscurity. Their tools, inscriptions, and myths provide fragments, but the full breadth of their knowledge, practical, spiritual, and psychological, has largely vanished. What were the principles that guided their work, and how did they conceive the interplay between matter, mind, and cosmos? How complete was their system, and what dangers might have been associated with accessing it? Could remnants of their practice linger, hidden in artifacts, myths, or even in subtle influences on later traditions of metallurgy, magic, and spiritual instruction? Standing on the cliffs of Rhodes today, it is possible to sense the whisper of those ancient workshops, the echo of hammers striking metal, the smoke of ritual fires, and the quiet hum of concentrated thought. The Telchines' presence seems to linger in the rocks, the sea, and the myths of the island, a testament to a civilization of craft, knowledge, and spiritual daring. What secrets did these masters of metal and mind leave behind? How did they perceive the relationship between the physical, the cognitive, and the spiritual? And how did they transmit that understanding in ways that could endure across centuries of myth and memory? And yet, so much remains unresolved. Were the Telchines primarily artisans, mystics, or philosophers of transformation? How much of their knowledge was intended for survival, for spiritual mastery, or for the shaping of reality itself? Can modern inquiry, guided by archaeology, myth analysis, and comparative study, ever hope to grasp the full depth of their teachings? Or are they destined to remain one of history's most tantalizing enigmas? In contemplating the secret teachings of the Telchines of Rhodes, we are invited to peer into a world in which mastery of the material and the spiritual were inseparable, where ritual, craft, and consciousness converged in ways that challenge our modern distinctions between science, magic, and psychology. What subtle truths about transformation, perception, and the human capacity to engage with the unseen might have been preserved in their teachings, and what mysteries linger still, waiting in the hidden coves, ruined workshops, and enduring myths of Rhodes for those willing to seek and reflect?